idea of uh, um, the garden having been a place of bondage, and Lucifer offering you this freedom. That's a theme in a lot of videos and songs and movies too.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which goes right along with what you're saying. You know, the whole idea of the Statue of Liberty being that whore on the waters that seduces the nations with her promise of freedom.
Yes. Yes.
Freedom of morality.
Yes. There we go. That's pretty much the foundation of the argument there. It's really about freedom from morality, freedom from order, from an authority
religion
over you, and of course religion. It's a direct rebellion against God. That's really all of this is, especially when you see, of course, there's this massive exaltation of Satan, right?
Yep. And look at the timing of it. At a time when we all should be focusing on our Lord and Savior, at least those of us who believe. Maybe we shouldn't expect the rest of the world to focus on the Lord, but at a time when, you know, his great sacrifice is supposed to be remembered.
Peace, peace. Dayz here with Brother Theo, the Unplug 'em channel. How are you doing, brother?
I'm blessed and highly favored.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. We're back here with episode 12, number 12 of the Tricknology podcast, and we're going to continue our conversation. And actually, we're going to touch on some new things as well. We've got some news recently. There's been this new, of course, right? Lil Nas X seems to still be out there, making a stink out there with his Luciferian and satanic work. You know, we talked about this guy, I'd say back in 2019, and I was bringing up the problem of this man or young man being around children. I believe he was going around doing shows for, these might have been first graders or second graders or something like that.
Yep, grade school kids.
Yes. And I was blown away because I knew what this artist stood for. Now, of course, his first song, you know, was, I guess, somewhat of a country track, like a country song, you know, the Old Town Road thing mixed with hip hop. And, you know, it seemed, I guess, generally or relatively mild. You know, it seemed like an innocuous type of track. But I knew just based on this artist's his internet activities. I knew he was running around with these types of highly degenerate crowds, the ABC, you know, movement. So I knew something was going to come up in the future regarding this kid. And here we go. You know, here we go. He's going full throttle now, you know, showing his truest colors, I'd say. And I believe you're actually putting together a piece on this whole situation now, aren't you, Brother Theo?
Yes, yes, I am, dear brother. Unfortunately, the Lord did call me to speak on this and gave me something to build off of that I think is worth speaking on. So that will be ready tonight. Maybe about an hour after you and I get off the air, I'll be uploading that.
Excellent. So you guys be looking out for that. Brother Theo on the Unplug 'em channel will be releasing a video dedicated to this entire situation with this little nasty X, Montero. And again, you know, really, this goes right back to all the old things we've been discussing for years now. And Brother Theo, far longer than me, has been discussing the foundations of this type of music. It is satanic. It is spiritual. You know, the general population, what some use the term normies, you know, people that are in the world, taken by culture, taken by trends, taken by markets. These individuals have very little understanding of what's really going on behind these things and underneath these types of things. They look at esoteric things, things like the occult, or honestly anything religious. These types look at with disdain. They turn a blind eye to a lot of these ideas as if they weren't fit to be recognized. And it's unfortunate for them because they're the ones that are easily manipulated. They're very easily possessed by a lot of this spirit of sensuality. Wouldn't you agree there, Brother Theo?
Most definitely. The sense that we're the most addicted to is definitely the sense of touch, and that's part of why the devil leans toward the use of sensuality to help to tempt man. In reality, in actuality, the five senses that we count are generally touch, um, in their bottom line nature. If you examine each one, even sight, the light has to touch the lenses of the eye. Sound, the vibration has to touch the eardrums. So we're bathed in touch, and the devil takes advantage of that as the prince of this world.
Yes, yes. Another thing
And
that. Go ahead. Sorry. Continue.
no, that was it.
Okay. Yeah, just looking at this article, it's hard, even though we're very familiar with this. This is stuff we've been working on for years and stuff we talk about quite often, but you can't help but be continuously bothered by this. This is, I mean, and please forgive me for the imagery. I know it's a bit ridiculous, right? And this is for educational purposes. And the clips we play today will be for educational purposes. There will be some profanity in some of these clips. I haven't had the ability or the chance to edit or censor the language for some of these clips we're going to play. So I just want to give you guys a little heads up there. And some of the imagery might be questionable, like this one here. He's clearly dancing on a stripper pole here. This is, I guess it's not proper to use the term peak degeneracy, though I know I have used it in the past because I think things are going and can get much worse than they are now. But we're not far from it, man. This is basically, for the times, this is peak degeneracy here. This is being sold to children. I mean, this sick, disturbed, satanic human being. Now, of course, we do have to empathize. A lot of these men and women and children. This guy's a child, right? He's disturbed. He is extremely disturbed. He is possessed by all types of demons. He is being used against his will, I'd say at this point. So I do have to recognize the fact that these individuals that are caught up in this don't really have the strength nor the faith to get through this and to overcome this. So
and that's especially if you've been groomed, like many of the younger people that we've been exposed to in the latter years, and really throughout the history of the entertainment business. If you look at Michael Jackson as an example, a lot of them were groomed, and it's not an excuse, but it is a reason for their behavior and for them being such lost and confused souls. So it's a good thing for those who care to actually lift them up in prayer.
Yes, absolutely. Well stated. I have to constantly remind myself of these things because it's very easy, being, human, of the flesh. It's very easy to get upset and get angry when you see these types of things. And of course, I do understand the concept of righteous anger, but we still do have to look at things full spectrum here. And yes, these young men and women are groomed very early. They go through very traumatic experiences very young that splits the mind, splits the spirit, and in a sense puts them in an enduring experience of flesh consciousness, this enduring and everlasting search for being and for identity through the flesh. And usually that is sexual. And unfortunately for those that practice the homosexual variety, they find themselves in an endless battle with the flesh. and an obsession with the self, such that they only seek themselves sexually. I personally believe homosexuality is a form of narcissism. I think it is just within the spectrum of narcissism. And there's a lot of literature that would probably agree with this. And I personally believe Lucifer was the premier narcissist, the embodiment of what we call narcissism in the world. So it's unfortunate, but I do understand this is a sickness. This is a type of possession. It is an issue of sin at the end of the day. Regardless of the secular arguments, this ultimately is a problem of sin. It's a problem of the heart, truly. And it's definitely it's a problem of the mind as well. Now, the worst part about this is this type of degeneracy, this sickness here, is being used as an excuse to, let's say liberty and freedom is being used as an excuse to get by, to get this type of degenerate content, this satanic symbolism and satanic messages and messaging. They misuse the concept of liberation and freedom to get this over on the society. And that's one of the worst parts here, because it's almost as if they're on a crusade. It's almost as if these individuals are on some type of moral crusade for freedom. As you see here, fighting LGBTQ repression. By dressing up like Satan, dancing on a pole, half naked, is that fighting? What do you? I don't know. What do you say, brother? This is just. I mean, he got some knee-high patent leather boots on, man.
I resolved to stay, or to try to stay, in the spirit of the Lord during this time of Passover, where we should be focused on things of Christ. Instead, things of the Antichrist and of his system have sucked all of the air out of the proverbial room by the devil's design. And it's important that we don't ignore what's obviously in front of our faces. And the elephant is in the room. He's scooting and pooting all around the room, and we have to acknowledge that and do something about it, else we end up crushed. So yes, it is a shameful thing. It is an embarrassing thing. It's an embarrassment for me personally, as a black man and as a person that was heavily involved in the music form of rap or hip hop music, or the culture of hip hop and the genre of rap. It is a shameful thing, and something that I regret that children have to lay their eyes upon. As you are very correct in your discernment that he would be used in a great capacity to help to further Satan's kingdom, or the kingdom of the Antichrist. And there's no coincidence that it is at the time of Passover, or at the time when we should be memorializing and remembering, not necessarily ritually recreating, but remembering the things that our Savior was about to do for our salvation. It's very interesting, and it's by coincidence. So it's a coincidence that his shoes and his video both came when they did, on and around the day that marked the start of Passover, March 26th. And, whether he knows what he's doing or not, and my guess is that he does at this point. We have to pray for him, and certainly for the children that got drawn toward him when he was singing the, at least outwardly, non-threatening song Old Town Road. It was outwardly non-threatening, but even he said himself, the lyrics, it wasn't for children to be singing in the first place. And it's just another case of the devil, gaining a mile with style because you gave him an inch in a pinch, because of the discomfort that some parents have with restricting their children's view or usage of certain worldly things, they allowed certain things to slip in. And this gave this particular artist a foothold in the minds of children that were much too young. And I mean, no matter what age you are, I'm almost 50 years old and I can't take it. But it gave children uh, um, a bonding to this young man and to his future projects. The very fact that folks let him slide with Old Town Road, which the first time I heard it and watched the video, I thought that the riding until he can't no more was referring to something like the lap dancing on the devil that he ended up doing in the Montero video in the first place, knowing how they speak in the songwriter secret code. But yes, it is an abominable and disgusting and wicked thing, and at the same time, it's a sad thing, and it's all contrived and based in deception. He's deceived himself, deceiving himself, and deceiving others at the same time, which is, that's the devil's way.
Always his way. And this slow and steady consecutive exposure to the younger generations, I think, is a key point here that you're making. And this is something we've followed for years through the Disney trauma-based mind control, specifically with artists like Miley Cyrus, for instance, and Lindsay Lohan. It's very interesting how this cycle seems to continue, and it's replicated over and over again. It's almost like a formula. It's a type of culture creation formula whereby they start off certain artists or celebrities, actors, entertainers, etc. And they start them off, especially when trying to expose them to the youth, they start them off as innocent. They begin in a likable, easygoing, friendly kind of way, and over time, and especially as they grow older, they start to transform and they start to become more and more sexualized. And before you know it, these young people are either addicted to some form of drug or substance, or practicing some type of hyperpromiscuity, or both. And they happen to be in relationships very early, hot and very chaotic relationships. And they're all in the news, all over the media. And these young children grow with these artists. And as they grow with these artists, as impressionable as young people are, it's a given that these young people are going to take on some of these behaviors. It depends on their state of individuality and confidence and security and so forth. But let's just be honest here, especially today. I'd say a great majority of young people today, young children that is for sure, aren't being raised in the way they were, say, 20, 30 years ago as far as secure base is concerned. Now, of course, there's always been bad parenting. There's always been some issue there. But I think that area has increased, and I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that, especially given the rise in smart technology, whereby many parents are very busy, spend little time with their children, are very taken by their devices. So just general neglect is rising. And neglect is just as abusive as sexual abuse, emotional abuse, even physical abuse. Neglect is just as debilitating, if not worse in some cases, because what it does is it shatters a reality. Children that are physically hit, at least they are experiencing a reality, even though it's a traumatic one. Children that are neglected have trouble even constructing a reality, because it's almost as if they don't exist. At least if someone hits you, you know you exist. It's a lot different to have no one pay attention to you. But anyhow, what we're seeing is a rise in this type of experience with children. And so that would suggest that these children today are probably more susceptible to falling victim to influence and latching on to celebrity, latching on to influencer, as it were, especially today. I think the TikTok phenomena is huge. They're more famous than celebrities now. The one girl, what's her name? Goodness, I forget her name, but she's probably the most famous TikToker. I actually did a video basically on her. She was just on Jimmy Fallon the other night. doing all of the TikTok dances. I mean, it's amazing to me what is being taken as influencer and celebrity today. It's madness. And to be fair, we could say, okay, well, she's pretty mild compared to someone like Lil Nas X, right? But still, it's the concept of children latching on to celebrity. That being said, we have people like Lil Nas X coming out, putting all this madness out there. This is the example for children today. This is what children are getting into and learning from today. Now, let me just read this little part here just to give you an idea what this is. So they're fighting for freedom and repression. We were discussing this a little bit before the show, Brother Theo, and we were talking about this concept of freedom, but it's a false sense of freedom. In actuality, it's not a freedom to be actually free, because freedom, to be free, you must have it costs, exactly. You have to pay something. In order to be free, you have to have some type of order, right? Otherwise, there's going to be chaos. There has to be some type of parameter to even enjoy freedom, right? But with this, it seems like they're trying to avoid, they're trying to be free from morality, free from an authority. Let me read this here. This is interesting. So it says, Lil Nas X self-presentation in Montero, Call Me By Your Name, is a stark contrast from his persona when Old Town Road stormed into the public consciousness 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, I was on this story, and I was trying to put it out there that this kid it's like he's sliding in the industry, but something about him isn't right. And sure enough, he came out as homosexual very shortly after that. And then I knew this young man is a weapon. He is going to be weaponized against the youth. He's going to be used as a targeted weapon for culture creation. And sure enough, 2021, he's dancing on poles half naked, right? So
Lord.
it's madness. And so let me continue here. When the song first hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in April 2019, Lil Nas had not yet come out to anyone. He was still singing about cheating on a female partner and bull riding and boobies. Now, they say that as if that's nothing, right? But that alone is disturbing to have little first graders singing along with, right? That alone is flawed. You see how they keep pushing the goalpost? It's like the Overton window. They just keep pushing it to it's just going to slide off of the scale, and then anything goes, right? This seems incrementalism. This seems to be the goal here. In an interview with Time, and of course Time Magazine, Skull and Bones, later that year, he said he had been taught from a young age that homosexuality is never going to be okay. As you can see here, this is all about pushing an agenda. This isn't about freedom. This isn't about getting a certain population of people that have a certain kind of lifestyle that they pursue rights. They have rights. They have more rights than most people today. In fact, this population of people are more wealthy, are more privileged, and have easier and more, I'd say, wealthy lives than the majority of people here. So the whole idea of oppression from this population is ridiculous. Maybe if you go back to the 60s and the 50s, you could probably say something like that. But this group has been exalted since the 80s, and it continues to be. So we understand that this is all propaganda, this is all rhetoric. But what they're trying to teach you here is at a young age, it says, right? So this is a message to the young. Basically, homosexuality is okay. And the worst thing you can do to a child when they're growing up is introduce all type of very mature concepts to them that they're not prepared for. Now mix in a traumatic experience or maybe a traumatic home experience with that. You're really preparing a generation for not just confused children, but children that are most likely going to get themselves in all type of alternative lifestyles, right?
Right.
We won't continue with this. I think you guys get the point here with this new demon out right now. So to continue on, I think our point here is we want to show how music is being used to change the direction of society, to create culture, to influence the young. And this is nothing new. We understand this goes way, way back. and there's a lot of variables playing here, right? But let's go back to a time where there still was some semblance of normalcy, morale, right? And we talked last time about Ice-T, and I think Ice-T is a good example, specifically for the entire cop killer situation. And if you're not aware, right now the Chauvin trial is going on for the Floyd situation. So basically, we're getting ready to probably see some more riots coming pretty soon. So this just reminds me of what we were dealing with in the early 90s. I remember, especially post Rodney King beating, we had Ice-T come out with the cop killer, and he claims it was written before Rodney King, but that's up for debate. And a lot of other types of music, especially Two Live Crew, who would, for the time, we could compare their reaction or the immorality of their music. We can compare that to someone like Lil Nas X, or many other these artists. But I wanted to show some clips here. And there's also a 1990 Oprah Winfrey episode that I want to kind of get through, so show some clips, because they were having a very good conversation in 1990 about some of the issues that comes with degenerate music. And I also have a Donahue clip with Two Live Crew. And it's just interesting to see the arguments, because we're making the same arguments today. In fact, what we're seeing right now is the consequences of what was happening in the 90s, in the early 90s. We are now seeing the consequences of allowing and accepting that type of music for our children, and accepting that type of culture. And what we're seeing now is just a consequence of that. So before we jump into these clips, is there anything you wanted to add in, brother?
No, we can get into the clips. I think that you nailed that, worded that perfectly.
All right. Well, let's start off here. So first, we're going to start off with just a small clip here. This is 93, and this is in reference to Ice-T's, I think this is in reference to his Cop Killer album. Let's see here.
Which was a whack album out of his albums.
It was.
I was an Ice-T fan, for lack of a better word. Ice-T's album, Rhyme Pays, had a great impact on my rhyme writing. He was really rhyming on that first album. And also, it was the first album that I had to sneak and listen to. That was my first hidden record, was Ice-T Rhyme Pays.
Really?
So yeah. Ice-T was in my top 5 for a long time. Rakim, Kane, Kool G Rap, Ice-T, and I think LL for quite some time. That was my top 5. But yeah, I've come to understand now. When I was a child, I thought like a child, and when I became a man, I put away childish things. I've come to understand. Really, it was around the time he put out Cop Killer and all of that media feeding madness that he was putting out, that I started to wake up and see him for what he was. And then, of course, much later, when I began to understand that some artists are actually trained plants from government projects, sometimes from the military.
Yes.
And they are inserted into the business.
Yes.
And I really believe him to be one of those. Can't prove it, but I do believe it.
Yeah, I agree. Now, he did come out of the military, correct? Or at least he was in the military prior to his career in the music industry, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I have more information. I do know that he also was I think a foster child, which is interesting to me.
I think that you're right. I do think that I remember hearing that.
It's very sad and unfortunate, but oftentimes foster homes and these types of networks, these types of organizations are pure sources for what some would call operations, whether that be MK Ultra or sleeper cells, different, or just markets, black markets, flesh markets. Unfortunately, this is the case, and this isn't to say anything bad about foster homes, but there's been plenty of work done on the industry, and though they do, of course, find young children homes and they do positive work, there is also that aspect there, unfortunately, that it can become a type of cyclical thing where children become part of the system, as it were, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So let's get into this. Let's jump right into this here.
Complain about his music or taking one set of lyrics out of context.
Find somebody who was from outer space, who never heard of Arnold Schwarzenegger, didn't know what he was doing, and you showed him the little clip of the movie where he killed up all the cops, right? And then you asked the person, you said, what do you think about this guy? They say, well, this is the most terrible person to walk the earth, right? But then that's what the media did to me this year. They took a 4-minute bite of my life, and they said, this is what this guy is about. And that's basically bullshit.
What he says makes sense. It's another point of view. It's a point of view that I think a lot of people are scared of hearing, and they're going to have to deal with it. It is a point of view that a lot of people have.
Ice-T no longer has a contract with Warner Brothers Records. The company released him after all the protest about his Cop Killer song, citing creative differences.
Now, this is an ongoing point, this point of they took it out of context. You can't just take a couple lines from my album and then judge me as a person. He's going to make this argument over and over again. Many other rap artists, especially those in the more violent and criminal variety, tend to make this argument. And of course, logically, it's just full of fallacies, right? Because we can clearly see that there is an overarching theme. There is, whether you take a line or two or three, or you look at the overarching theme of the artist's work, and you will see a type of a narrative, even, right? This narrative that seems to be, I think, overall negative, right? Overall violent, criminal, or sexual. Am I right?
Yes. And gangster rappers would invariably always get on these shows, Donahue, Jenny Jones, whatever show, and they would make excuses for that behavior. They would try to make it sound like an intellectual reasoning, or like, some sort of, hey, this is where we're from and we're just trying to express ourselves type of excuse. But at the end of the day, the goal was for them to make evil fair seeming. Yes. And to push the envelope just a little bit further.
Yes, to make evil fair seeming. Yes, that's exactly what this is. And it's so snaky and manipulative. And there's also the profit motive. There's also that these guys are capitalists, all of them. We all are to a degree. We're Western. This is the way this is how our economy works. I'm not making any. I'm not disparaging capitalism, but what I am saying is there's always that motive there that must be considered. And I think a lot of these guys, especially these types that become very famous, they carve themselves a type of position of power, elitism even, especially considering his career. They have a dog in the fight, right? They have multi-million-dollar contracts. They have very, I say, affluent lifestyles in living quarters, and they have something to argue for. So of course they're going to make up excuses for that. So there's that aspect too. And then I'll say there's a lack of empathy, and we'll get into that a little later when we get to the Oprah clips. But really, these guys, they're making moral arguments, but they're showing a strong lack of empathy at the same time, which shows you not only cognitive dissonance, but I'd say sociopathy. A lot of these guys, they're sociopaths.
Sociopaths at the least.
At the
Maybe
least.
even some of them psychopathic. Because during that time, you know, the gangster rap, like Gangsta Nip from Texas, out around the same time. The gangster rap at that time, it was par with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone movies as far as pushing the levels of violence. And it wasn't only rap, too, by the way, during this same time period. There was just a push in entertainment to push the boundaries of what had been acceptable by the public's expectations. You know, the public expected for you to only go so far in movies. They expected for you to only go so far in music. People had pushed the envelopes before, but there was a new normal that was being standardized by the likes of Ice-T in the rap music realm, and by the likes of Schwarzenegger and Stallone, and prior to them even Charles Bronson and Clint Eastwood. You know, this new level of violence, also marked by the Jason Friday the 13th movies and the Freddy Krueger Nightmare on Elm Street movies. There was a new normal that was part of desensitizing the generation that was coming up at the time.
Yes. Oh man, you're nailing it. Yes. So just excellent point, bringing up the tie-in of films at the time. This is very, very important, because as much as we want to say hip hop and rap music, specifically gangster rap music, came directly out of the hood, came directly from these, you know, these downtrodden young males who had something to say, there was an era of this spirit, right? And I think we can find that in the 70s. And there's something about the 70s. When we look at the 70s, okay, so we see a response to the sexual revolution, post-war era, right? Post-Vietnam, we have a new influx of oil issues, right? There's economic issues, right? We have the economic issues of 73. We have Nixon playing with the money. We have the oil crisis. We have all of these different socioeconomic and socio-political crises that are going on that breeds and creates a type of discontent just in general. People's money was funny, right? So that alone brings some tension. But then if we look at the same time, we will also notice that there's all these new films coming out, right? There's all these new horror films. The horror genre seems to take off. I think the first slasher film or what we would consider a slasher horror film was The House on the Left or something like that. I can't remember the name, but it was.
And if I can just kind of stick this in there right quick,
please,
because I don't want to be mistaken by the listeners as saying that this was the first time that we saw this in entertainment. I'm confident that that's not what I said, but I think that that's what some people heard for some reason. I said, I'm talking about what I'm seeing in the chat. I said that it was when it became normalized.
Yes.
It began, as your work does an excellent job of detailing, it began to be a thing, if you will, during the counterculture movement. Make no mistake, of the 60s into the 70s. Make no mistake. That broke the Ozzie and Harriet 50s and 40s norm like never before.
Absolutely.
Make no mistake.
Absolutely.
But those were exceptions to the rule and not the rule, and they were eyebrow raisers. Those were the type of things that you did in secret, and people looked side-eyed at you for engaging in or indulging in. I'm talking about by the time Ice-T and them came out, or like I saw somebody saying in the chat there, by the time the Ghetto Boys was singing "Mind of a Lunatic," I was into that, and this was the norm. It was the world around me. Growing up in Detroit in the late 80s and early 90s, especially during that time, this was the world. It was norm. And it wasn't just my world, but it was the world that was being projected to young people, as I was a young person at the time, all over the nation, and by proxy all over the world, because America sets the standard for what the rest of the world's parameters for sex and violence, or what the rest of the world's limits of sex and violence will go to.
Yes.
So something changed to where it was no longer something peppered in. It became the norm.
Yes, it definitely became the norm. And I think we could put a lot of that influence, I want to avoid using the term blame, but we can put a lot of the influence on that of Hollywood. Because if we want to be honest here, aside from sports, because I know Michael Jordan plays a key role here, even music, Michael Jackson, for instance, Hollywood really influences other countries and spreads this type of neoliberal Western culture. It's Hollywood is really where it's at. When people talk about the United States or talk about America, especially in a third world country, you're going to hear L.A. and Hollywood. People are going to think, you're American, you must live on the beach. How is Hollywood? This is what people, this is what they think of in many cases, just generally speaking, to be generic in the example. This is just a very generic kind of representation here. So if we look at Hollywood during the 70s, it's very interesting. Now, across the board, there's many different styles of film and so forth. But if we look at the horror genre, and what I find interesting about the horror genre, especially the slasher film, which really made its statement in the 80s.
Yes, sir.
During the crack era, during the crack era, and even
right in conjunction.
Yes, right. So my argument is that there was a spirit moving post Vietnam War. Now we could say it kind of took off after World War II, because after World War II, that's when we started to become a type of world power. Technology started to grow. This is when computer technology began. This is the early formation of the internet. Everything really started in the late 50s, right? And of course, this is the tail end of the Beat generation, where we got the first type of neoliberal movement of the country, right? This is all, I think, a logical conclusion to the works of FDR and the Great New Deal and the type of socialist sentiment that we got with FDR. This put people into a position to be more open to being controlled, and it definitely created or spawned a new type of liberated culture. And so back to these films in the 70s. Well, let's look at horror. So horror, really, from my studies, horror, especially the slasher film, was really inspired by giallo films. I think that's how you pronounce it. These are Italian horror films of the late 60s and early 70s. And it's interesting how slasher films aren't really necessarily even American. So I found that interesting. We actually took a lot of inspiration from giallo films, and we flipped them. We took them and ran with them, and I'd say turn them into something a lot more, I guess, entertaining or more watchable. But from that moment, what else was going on simultaneously was actual murders, serial killing was occurring around this time. Is this a coincidence? Some people say yes. I don't believe in coincidences.
Me either, sir.
So there's some type of spirit that was brewing. And what else was brewing during this time? The disco era. Where did hip-hop come from? Hip-hop came out of disco. Hip-hop came directly out of disco. Now, I'll say
drugs and pharmakia.
Yes.
Sorcery. The sorcery of the disco ball, the lights, all of that morphed into hip-hop music, where the sorcery continued, with the death-defying supernatural dances that we called break dances. Doing 1990, spinning on your wrist while the rest of your body suspended in the air above you, and all of these type of things, which only, not just some good physical conditioning can cause for you to do those things. Certain spirits have to be at play. So yes, there was an influx of new powerful spirits of dominion and wickedness in high places that were let out through this entertainment. And all over the world, there have been examples of extreme forms of entertainment. Just like with the American language, which we call English, but it's nothing like what they speak in England, or it's a very poor form of that. But just like with the American language, all of American culture takes the worst of what the rest of the world has to offer, and what the rest of the world might do sparingly, we overdo it and we pile it on your plate. So the slasher film phenomenon didn't begin here, but it was here where it was flooding our neighborhoods. I remember walking with my little cousins to go and see Friday the 13th. Nobody should have let us, first of all, leave the house to go see Friday the 13th. It was rated R. And secondly, nobody should have let us in the theater to see Friday the 13th. The social norms and mores were changing.
There it is.
And that is a uniquely American thing as the head of the Babylon mystery system worldwide. You know, we control what's popular. And unfortunately, those are the most devilish things. Sometimes the most devilish things aren't born and created on American soil, but we go to wherever they're born and created at or in, and we take those things and bring them here.
Yes, that's exactly what we do, and that's what we did. And from that came Friday the 13th, came the Hollywood series or Halloween series, came Nightmare on Elm Street, and all of the others in between. What was it? Texas Chainsaw Massacre was one of the earliest ones, next to House on the Left or whatever that one was. But what that film was really known for was just being very open here or clear, it was a very traumatizing or traumatic rape scene that had never really been done in a film. And this, though it was frowned upon, unfortunately, it gave the film more fame. It made a new thing. Now, in giallo films, Italian horror films, this was the norm. Giallo films though they're very artistic and they definitely play a lot into color and sound, and there is a very aesthetic about them, a very aesthetic element about them that an artist could appreciate. The theme of these films tended to revolve around young, beautiful women being tracked down and murdered. Okay. Now, from this era of films, from this very microcosmic film industry, came films like I Spit on Your Grave and these types of things. So it's interesting to see how just the abuse of women, gory murder, for instance, just violence, criminality, abuse of women, and violence started to become more popularized and accepted through Hollywood.
Yes.
In the 70s. And we also saw this in blaxploitation films. And I think this is precisely what I think, in a sense, started to downgrade and deteriorate the black quote unquote culture, right, during post-60s. I agree. Right.
I agree.
Taking us away.
It rewrote the norms.
Diluted any Christian ethics and started to prop up the attention economy, this idea of fame, this idea of being cool, this idea of being fly, this idea
being street as being positive.
Being street as being positive for men, and being sexy and alluring as positive for women. And not, and not in any, modest beauty sense, but I'm talking about, prostitution practically, right? I mean, these roles the women would play, they're borderline prostitutes or black widows that go around sleeping with men and killing them. So these types of of themes. These archetypes became
Power through
normalized.
sex.
There we go. Thank you for the wording. Power through sex. Not just sex, but power. And then you think of mixing pain with pleasure. You think of the masochism therein. You start to pay attention to all of these different things coinciding around 1969 to about 1978. And you got just darkness of every kind. And of course, you have, if you really want to go deep into it, you have the whole neo-pagan revival that was going on during that time, as well as a lot of witchcraft. Wicca had a new movement going on at that time. And a lot of dark metal and these types of glam rock, which is all theosophy and just madness, right? So all of this was just pumped into Hollywood, pumped out to the society. And fans and even actors and entertainers involved with this area were found in Studio 54 and part of the disco movement. The disco movement was like the 20th century Dionysian cult, right? The Apollonian sex cult, right? And through that, not the art form, but the industry, hip hop would come. The
and it's interesting industry. Too, because now you're doing a superb job of laying out the time frame. And still, let us remember the cultural perspective. And when I say cultural, I mean the overall American point of view of folks that engaged in those types of counterculture movements. They were considered to be weirdos. Even then, what we're looking at as we see Ice-T here on the screen was a way to bring that weirdo vibe or that weirdo persona, that mold from out of the closet and into normalcy. That's what the Lil Nas X video does, which is something that would not have been able to happen had Ice-T and 2 Live Crew and Too Short and Gangsta Nip and the Ghetto Boys and NWA and all of the rest of them not done their part prior. So it's the fact that there's always been counterculture, but at one time what most of the population considered those people who engaged in those cultures to be was odd or queer.
Yes.
Which is another word for odd. And now queerness or oddness or weirdness is the norm. So when you keep moving the goalposts like that, then normal becomes strange, or rather what is strange becomes normal. That's the goal of incrementalism. Even something as small as when Run DMC saying Peter Piper, they say, not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good.
Yes.
And that slang was something that started in the 60s and 70s, maybe even in the 50s. In the 50s, it was a few people that said bad meaning good. In the 60s and 70s, more and more people said it. James Brown even made it popular, super bad. But by the time it's the 80s, it was what we all said. If we saw a girl who was pretty, we said she was bad. If we saw a car that was a beautifully made vehicle, we would say that car was bad. So it had went from being something a few people did or a counterculture did into something now that the larger culture had accepted.
Yes.
That's the devil's incrementalism. And that's how he plays the game.
Yes. And this proves the importance of barriers, the importance of boundaries, the importance of law and order, the importance of authority, right? The importance of constraint on one's loins, constraint on one's desires, constraint on one's wishes. This is proof that the the unmitigated idea of freedom and liberty, that the libertine lifestyle is insanity and chaotic, because without order, you only have chaos. And that's the problem with the incrementalism. It pretends to be, it pretends to be progress. You know, you hear people saying,
there you go.
You'll hear people saying, oh, we're evolving. Our culture is evolved.
Yes, sir.
But that's not necessarily the case when you see that not only have we evolved in the amount of things we can do now, but we've also increased the negative reactions to it. Higher death rate, higher suicide, higher anxiety, depression, all of these different things. So
all these things are through the roof now.
They don't want to.
That we have more freedom.
Yes, they don't want to pay attention to those things. They don't want to pay attention to all the consequences, as if these things just happen indirectly. That's not the case at all. I want to show you an example here. I have some really old, these like probably early 90s, out of Source magazine. I used to get Source magazine for years, and I would just collect these things, and I have some clips. And I like looking at the old ads, because you can see the marketing. You can see the marketing of criminality, the marketing of the culture, which in turn normalizes this lifestyle or this worldview, or I would even call it a philosophy. Mm-hmm. That's the problem with rap music and certain types of rap music and certain types of music in general. It's not just selling you rhythm. It's not just selling you sound and all of that, dance. No, it's selling you a philosophy of life, a way of living.
Yes. Mm-hmm. A culture.
It's selling you a culture. And this is something people who love the world, people who love their things, they never want to pay attention to these very, very deep aspects of these things. It's selling you much, much more than the surface. Check this out. So this is an ad for an album. It's got street, it's got ghetto, it's got sex, it's got bass, it's got rock, it's got awareness, it's got hip hop, it's got truth, it's got knowledge, it's got balls. The debut album from the most electrifying new rap group of the 90s, Assault and Battery. Okay.
Well, I never, and I'm glad I never did.
So just paying attention to the language. We always do this here. Paying attention to the way this is the message in the medium. Okay, so first we get street, ghetto, sex, right? So we got the street element, the sexualized element, the criminality. No, ghettos aren't defined by crime, but that's what they mean when they use it here. Okay, because crime equates to status. Criminality equates to bravado. It creates to, do you got the juice? Who got the juice? What does juice mean? We know what juice means. When someone says, oh, he got the juice. Oh, you got the juice now. We know what that means, right?
Right.
So that's relating to someone with high proclivity or proclivity to criminality, right? So, and then we got bass, rock. Oh, wait, awareness, hip hop, truth, knowledge. So it's interesting. The first half you get kind of the more negativistic, but then on the bottom, they got to bring in that more conscious kind of 90s knowledge rap aspect. So this came out during that era of the transition. This is during that transitional period.
Excellent, right? Excellent.
So they still had to keep that there. And then so here, Assault and Battery is the name of the group. Now, honestly, I've never heard of this group. I've never heard their music. This is just one of the ads. You know, you could pay for an ad in Source magazine, but Source magazine was probably.
Oh, this is so funny because I remember people that had, like, you know, I knew some guys that had paid for an ad in Source magazine, and they were whack too. And I'm sure that this was whack.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But yeah, it's really. It's profound that people, even people who weren't good at the art part or the music part of the music business, they began to understand that something was changing in the business part. And so marketing yourself as conscious or being a knowledge rapper had previously been the thing to do, so you didn't want to totally abandon that. But here you see the change, the incrementalism we've been talking about. The top three things, as you said, showed and proved that they also recognize, wait a minute, marketing ourselves is changing. So now we have to be sure that we're drawing folks in by letting them know, hey, we've got these bases, pun intended, covered, these base things, these lower desires. You're going to get all of that if you listen to us. But also, if you happen to be a little bit older, or if you're not a new Johnny come lately listener to this music form here, and you're used to certain things, we've got that covered too, which is a lie because you couldn't possibly have both ends covered without compromising or sacrificing the other end.
Yes.
That's the whole idea of the Hegelian dialectic, which is what they did by switching things from quote unquote knowledge or conscious rap over to gangster quote unquote rap, which again, let me not be mistaken by anybody. I know when gangster rap started. I've been listening to it from the very beginning, and Schoolie D and Spoonie G, Philadelphia and New York respectively, started off gangster rap.
Mm-hmm.
And, folks could even argue Boogie Down Productions, although that's not nearly as early as the two gentlemen that I just named. But, the Boogie Down Productions crew, which brought you KRS-One, were arguably gangster rap in the beginning also. But as we've stated over and over again, these things existed. Like there's always wickedness that exists. There's always the negative side of things. But usually that's not the side that people want to highlight, or rather in a normal or in a moral, let's say, situation or society, people don't desire to highlight what's negative. So it was showing that the powers that should not be, were effectively turning society, from, not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good. They were turning society over to prefer the negative.
Yes. Such that the negative would define anything good, anything positive, anything of value.
There you go.
Isn't that interesting? To be perceived as valuable in the industry, specifically in hip hop during this time, or at least especially moving forward into the early 90s or the gangster rap era, negativity defined value. Positivity was looked down upon. In fact, by 93, anything positive was discouraged, and you were relegated to the corners of backpack rap.
Yes.
Period.
Yes.
Period.
And I'll take you one further. In 1990 or 1991, you could wear glasses and dress in such a way that displayed knowledge and understanding of your cultural roots and your heritage, and you could be considered to be very attractive because of those things. And by 1993, that had just about reversed. A person who portrayed themselves as being more in tune with the street or the criminal element, even more so, because everybody in the street ain't into the crime of the street. But if you showed yourself to be involved in the criminal element, now you began to look more like the desirable man, according to what media and pop culture was telling you. And yes, there's always been, I hate when I bring up the rule and people tell me about the exception. There's always been an attraction to bad boys. You can find that in old school films and movies like Rebel Without a Cause.
Yes, and
you can find that.
The scientific term for that is called hybristophilia, just to add that if anyone's interested. Go on, sorry.
Hybristophilia can be exemplified going all the way back to the silent films even. But again, there were these things that a few people did, and the rest of us, quote unquote, looked at them like, what's wrong with them? those strange things, those oddities, those queer behaviors went from being something a few people did to being the norm, to where the majority of people were into a thug life or gangster male figure, either as, one man looking up to another man, or a woman looking up to a man that she considered to be manly or desirable. And again, there were exceptions to the rule, and thank God there were. But the rule had changed. What was the exception had become the rule. And this happened across the board, also with the women. The way that women were portrayed, again, we said going all the way back to the 60s and the 70s, we saw the popularity of this, or we saw the increase in the number of films that showed these things. It still was something that a counterculture engaged in. By the time we in the 80s or 90s, I knew personally a lot of young girls that wanted to be in the strip culture or wanted to be Luke dancers. These or wore move something dresses or biking shorts, the old school equivalent of today's yoga pants, right?
Yes.
Again, in a lot of cases. So yes, the bar moved. The limitation changed. The incrementalism continues.
Yes. Now I have to qualify some of these ideas with respect to ethnicity. So one thing I do want to say is a lot of this music had been and continues to be enjoyed and appreciated by many people. Okay, and there isn't a negative or a debilitating consequence for following this culture and following this music. And I'm speaking more so to those of, say, maybe the upper middle class, suburbia, though that's changing. Over the decades, there are entire neighborhoods, regions of people that have enjoyed this music and have simply enjoyed it as an art form. Okay, we have to be let's address that. But what's important here, I think, as far as debilitating culture is concerned, though, it has affected everyone. In certain communities, this isn't just music. This isn't just...
It's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle.
Yes, sir.
It is identity. Okay.
And dare I say, it started off that way. And every other form of enjoyment, quote unquote, of it was secondary. Meaning that, the elephant in the room is that this art form, quote unquote, or this musical form or genre started off in the ghettos of North America. And it's in those ghettos that it got popularized to the point of being called and considered a culture. That's where it started. And it was a way of life for people before it was a sideshow attraction for people, or before it was a casual enjoyment for people. It was a way of life first. In the Bronx, New York, it was a way of life first. Then people from outside of that way of life began to take to it and could indulge in it as they so choose, and dip one foot in and take that foot out right quick. But for others, as you stated, this changed my neighborhood.
Yes.
This changed walking to school for me.
Yes.
So like, it's not just like a theory thing. I saw the change in people.
Yes.
I remember the way it felt walking around the neighborhood when knowledge rap was all the rage versus the way it felt walking around the neighborhood post Bone Thugs and Harmony and Tupac. And that's the reality.
Yes. So we have to put that out there, because from certain individuals from certain walks of life, hey, this is just music, guys. I grew up listening to this and I love all of this music. Guess what? I love it too. I loved it too. This has always been a part of my life. Some of the most grimiest stuff to some of the most odd and eccentric stuff, whether it be Def Jux or No Limit. You know, I was there. The thing is, some of this stuff, and I'd say the more popular stuff, is extremely toxic for certain walks of life, and that's mainly young black men in inner cities, or not just necessarily inner cities, doesn't have to be the city. We have many suburban areas that are suffering because of this type of culture that has melded with gang culture, right? Drug culture, you know,
Yes.
the hustler movement. You know,
Yes.
many people get knocked off over block wars. I've seen it happen. All of
Yes,
this,
sir.
all of these experiences, real life experiences, are lived out in the real world, but the stories are told on the album, told on tracks. It's the soundtrack to the lifestyle. And when you have young men growing up and this is all they have in their ears, and they're living that life, and they're having babies, it's just, it produces a part of reality that we just want to look away from and focus on the culture being a fun and thriving thing in the world. There's positives, but there's also many negatives that we must address here. And there's an example here in this old Bad Boy Entertainment ad I got here. It says, the next generation of bad MFers. And it got a little baby in diapers with a gun, or pointing his hand like he got a gun. This is just a great example of what I'm talking about. All people that listen to this type of music aren't raising their kids this way, right?
Right.
This is something that has to be addressed here. So there is an element of this music that is extremely detrimental, and this is something that people like Ice-T and those that want to, you know, speak positively about this movement don't address. And then they want to say, oh, well, the parents got to raise their kids right. You guys got to know what your children are listening to. There's an element of truth there, but at the same time, maybe this type of thing shouldn't exist at all, right? Now, is this to say we want to outlaw your ability to speak for yourself or free speech or free expression? No, but we should be able to stand up and say, hey, we don't want that, you know? Now, of course, there's the profit motive. I understand that. There's always that profit motive, and I think that's one of the strongest aspects here, because you get young men that want to get out of the hood, young men that want to make it, young men, or they just want to be rich. They just want to be famous. They want women. Right, they go down this route for very individualistic and narcissistic reasons. So they have a dog in a fight. They have a motive behind them, and these corporations and these massive companies exploit that. Right, we see that with Liar Cohen of Entertainment 300 Entertainment, who I think is a perfect example. He had an artist who was dying from literally killing himself with opiate abuse. And he signed this artist, and he knew, if I sign this guy, he's going to kill himself. He signed him anyway. And in an interview, the man asked him, he's like, well, you knew about his drug use, you know, didn't you, you know, and I had a friend tell me this one time. He's like, you know, I'm glad that I'm impoverished. I'm glad that I don't have money, because if I did, I'd kill myself. And what he meant is, if he had enough money, he'd probably buy so many drugs, he'd kill himself. He was very straight up honest about that. He's like, it's good that I'm broke. Otherwise, I'd party myself to death. And this is pretty much what these artists do, because they're broken, they're lost, they come from broken homes, their identities are shattered, their personalities are destroyed, and you know, they're possessed by all types of spirits. And so these guys like Liar Cohen, they hire these young men as artists, and then they exploit them, and these artists end up killing themselves. I think Juice WRLD is another example of this, who's recently died. Fredo Santana. I mean, I could go down the list.
Many examples.
So many, right? And this just proves that it's not about the music, it's not about the culture. There's this strong profit motive, but then there's also a very strong satanic motive, which has to do with self-worship and getting mine. However, by any means necessary, right? Even if it
costs me my life or you your life.
Yes. So before we're gonna finally get to these clips here. This has been great conversation here. We're gonna get into these clips.
Yeah, man, I'm enjoying it, and I do want to get to everything that you've got lined up.
Yeah, and we probably won't be able to because I got a lot, but we can continue this all next week, man, because there's a lot to be said here, and I have a whole bunch of different clips that we have to discuss because we're just seeing the results of these things that were going on way back in the 90s and in the 80s that were just responses to the 60s and the 70s. And this, in order to understand your situation in the present, you really got to go back and look at the past. And unfortunately, most people don't really have the time or the attention to even do that. So we try to assist there. But yeah, it's very, very, very interesting. I'm loving the way this is going. So let me pull this down here.
Roll that beautiful bean footage.
Yeah, let's get to this next clip here. So now we're going to move forward a little ways, and we're going to come to more recently. Ice-T's a little more grown, got a little more, maybe wears a bigger belt size.
Bigger bank account.
Yeah, bigger bank account, got a little more sense about himself. And it says maybe a little more wise, got a little more wisdom. Some of the things he says here are spot on. Mind you, I still believe this man is a hypocrite. I still believe he is a narcissist. He is focused on getting that bag. He's focused on staying elite, because if he wasn't, he would have really done some things to change communities. And instead of just giving somebody some money or opening up, some little program that you hardly frequent. A lot of these philanthropists, or however you pronounce it, these guys, they throw money at people, but it's not always about throwing money. It's about actually making some change in more material ways outside of monetary. But anyhow, let's play this little clip, and I just want you to listen to his opening here, because it kind of describes what we're saying as far as especially young black youth in the inner cities, or just it doesn't necessarily have to be black youth, because I see examples of this happening across the board. It's transracial. It's white, it's black, it's Asian, it's Latino. I see this example throughout, especially coming from the Bay Area, where it's extremely diverse. I mean, I've seen areas in different, as a kid, I was put into a program in school, and I wasn't really a bad kid. I kind of hung out with the crowd of kids that one would consider bad, I guess. And I got wrapped up into this. So, I was put into this program. It's kind of like a scared straight program. And
okay.
Yeah. And it was interesting. I learned a lot. I really did. I learned a whole lot. I found it fascinating. I got to get out of class. I loved that. And I'd get to go talk to felons and criminals, and they, tell us stories. And I loved it. It was amazing. For me, it was just very interesting. I remember just looking forward to hearing all of these stories. It didn't really scare me. I just found it very fascinating. But one thing I was shocked was how diverse the criminals and the violent men were. They were from all walks of life, all types of races. And it really blew me away, because you get, painted a picture through media that's not really anything like reality. Anyhow, I need to stop talking. Let's play this here.
Okay.
There's a term they call victim of circumstances. A lot of people don't understand the circumstances that get people in trouble, or where you start. And I always think about it, I'm like, what started me down that road? And I think what happens is, at some point, you lose hope. Like a kid or somebody with no hope, they ain't got nothing to lose. So it's so easy to make bad decisions. Your brain just says, so what? I ain't got no dad at home. I ain't got no mom at home. I ain't got no money. I'm not going to make it. So let me take this chance. Now, as I've actually moved up in my life, I have a lot more to lose. So you start to weigh out these things. But when you're dealing with most of these gentlemen that are in this institution, if I ask them every time I get here, I say, when? 17, 18. 19. Really before, that's when they go in. That's how old they are. This is even before your brain is even capable of making great decisions. Anybody in this audience, if I ask you, compare what you thought about at 18 to how you feel now, you'll say, I was out of my fucking mind at 18. Everything I thought at 18 was wrong. Everything. So now you take a kid, let's put him into a situation. He doesn't have a lot. He's stuck. His decision-making process is going to be terrible. add a gun, add the pressure of the hood, you understand? Because a lot of people don't come from, when you come from the hood, I come from the ghetto, I come from South Central Los Angeles, and manhood is at a premium, okay? You can't, everyone's pushing on you. You know, I'm a light-skinned dude, I got green eyes, hazel eyes, my name is fucking Tracy. You ever heard that song, Boy Named Sue? I was under pressure. I'm an orphan. I got no brothers, no mother. So I'm either going to be predator or prey. There's pressure. You don't understand. It's not like in the hood. There's predators. People are gonna. You got to be tough. You got to start lifting weights. You got to get ready for every day going to school. I mean, I don't know if a lot of y'all ever had to deal with that, but sometimes it's terrifying just leaving the house. So what am I going to do? Am I going to be prey? No, I'm going to be the bad guy. I'm going to be crazier than everybody else. Like 50 Cent said in one of his records, he said, this ain't how my mama raised me. This is how the hood made me.
Oh, boy.
So you get caught up into this mental, and then you turn into this weird kind of monster, but it's a security device. You're trying to just stay alive. You want to keep people off your back. People look at me today, they say, why is your face like that? You seem angry. I'm like, my face is just fucked up and stuck like this from growing up. This look, you see, this is nigga don't not fuck with me right now. But I don't really want you messing with me because I'm the nicest guy you ever meet. I'm nice. I don't want no problems, but this is a defense mechanism. So I didn't know I was coming to a musical event. I didn't know. They just said they want y'all to come up to sing, and talk. I'm like, hell yeah, I got a day off, I'll come. So, you know, but in my music, what I did was I tried to give you the mindset of the street kid.
Now, here goes the BS. I was with him for a minute on some of that. Just coming from a developmental perspective, some of that is accurate, you know, and this is across the board. Anybody who grows up with the inability to, you know, develop a somewhat stable personality, some type of secure attachment through bonding through with the parent, anybody that doesn't experience these things and are put in a situation where they deal with daily violence or this type of almost like a war state, you know, in some of these areas, Chicago, for example, young kids growing up in these war states, you know, they do actually suffer from a type of PTSD. So I do understand that some of this can be true, but this isn't to say you have no accountability. You can't think for yourself. This may be the case up till maybe, you know, 15, 16. But after that, you got to start thinking a little bit more for yourself and taking a little more accountability. But now he's gonna try to go into, oh, well, this is what I do with my music, and it's like, well, let's just hear what he says, and you'll kind of get an idea. But maybe a little bit more of this, and then we'll go to the next clip.
You know, I did a song for New Jack Hustler for the movie New Jack City.
He's gonna do the New Jack City track verse here, and it's actually pretty good. Do you remember this track, Theo?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I forgot how good this verse is. It's actually pretty on point, and there's a lot of truth being said, but this is the point. The point isn't that what he's saying isn't true. What he's saying in his rap doesn't have merit. The point is, it's in a sense glorifying that experience. It may not mean to, right?
Right.
But it does.
Right.
Because when the young men see this, they don't hear it like, oh man, that's a horrible story, man. Gosh, I don't ever want to end up that way. We're like, oh man, that's cool. That's right. That's a man's life right there. Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So check it out here.
I remember that.
Where some of the lyrics I say, well, here I come. So you better break north as I stride, my gold chain slides back and forth. I care nothing about you, and that's evident. All I love is my dope and dead president. Sound crazy? Well, it isn't. The ends justifies the means. That's the system. I learned that in school, and then I dropped out, hit the streets, checked the grip, and now I got clout. I had nothing, and I wanted it. You had everything, and you flaunted it. Turned the needy into the greedy. With cocaine, my success came speedy. Got me twisted, jammed into a paradox. Every dollar I get, another brother drops. Maybe that's the plan, and I don't understand. God damn, you got me sinking in quicksand. But since I don't know, and I ain't never learned, I got to get paid. I got money to earn. With my posse out on the Ave, bump my sounds, crack a 40 and laugh. Cool out and watch my new Benz gleam. Is this a nightmare or the American dream? So think twice if you're coming down my block. You want a journey through hell where shit gets hot? Pregnant teens, children screams. Life is weighed on the scales of a triple beam. You don't come here much and you better not. Wrong move, ambulance cot. I got to get more money than you got. So what if some motherfucker gets shot? That's how the game is played. Another brother slayed. The wound is deep, but y'all giving us a Band-Aid. The education's low, but I got long dough. I'm raised like a pit bull. My heart pumps nitro. I sleep on silk, lie like a politician. My Uzi's my best friend, cold as a mortician. Lock me up, that's genocidal catastrophe. There'll be another one after me.
Hustler. Yeah, that was hard.
Ooh, there'll be another one after me. Key point.
That was hard.
Key point. Cyclical. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Cyclical.
And even a broken watch is right twice a day, but just lyrically, his ability to tell a story in a way that a lot of people had tried to tell it, I suppose, in blaxploitation films and whatnot, although it's not a perfect story to tell and not a perfect way to tell it, the artistic ability was definitely there. And that's why, like I said, he was in my top 5 for a long time.
Yeah.
Rhymes like that. That was a well-structured rhyme and story. But as you've been doing an excellent job explaining tonight, it only told a part of the story, and it told the part of the story that glorified the wrong, not the right. It made an excuse for the criminal life.
Yes.
And that's what a lot of good gangster rappers, and there were some good gangster rappers, MC8, Ice Cube, some of those guys had lyrical ability and some degree of poetic acumen. But that doesn't change the fact that when they grabbed the mic, their art gave excuses for bad behavior. Filthy conversation corrupts good manners.
Yes. And this speaks directly to what I was trying to say in the last show, this idea of externalizing instead of internalizing perspective. So with the knowledge rap, it was more internal, meaning we're more looking at how I think about things. What do things mean to me? What do I mean? What does society mean? It's more of a meaning-based thing. When things started shifting towards this perspective, as I was trying to say in the last show, things have become externalized, whereby we're focusing on society. We're focusing on the environment that made me. No longer do I make me through my behavior and my choices.
Right. That's right.
Because choices in life is what makes a man or woman. Choices in life.
That's right.
Regardless of the lot you've been given, regardless of the state or condition you are in, right? Your choices in life are what shape you. Now, of course, some people are going to be in a better position per se, maybe resources, etc. Right? Of course, there is always inequality. This is the way the Lord brought us into the world, and this is the way He had meant it for us to be. I'm not going to complain about that. I'm going to figure out what I can do through my choices to figure out myself and the world around me. That perspective started to change, especially with this externalized view. It's like, hey, it's not my fault. It's the external. It's the environment. I'm just a product of my environment, and I'm going to tell you my story. BS. Because this is an opportunity to make money. This is a way to create a market. And
a way to justify not changing your behavior, not taking responsibility, or like, the new buzzword of this era, not taking accountability for your behavior. And that was the problem, by and large, with gangster rap. And that's why they took that negative thing that existed for a long time, since rappers have been rapping. Cold Crush brothers were gangster. So since brothers have been rapping, there's been gangster rap. It was something that was side-eyed. It was something that few people did. It was a part of a counterculture within a culture. And then they took that thing and they amplified it, and now it defines the genre. There are some people who know of nothing but gangster rap. There are some people who don't remember anything prior to gangster rap, or whose definition of rap is really centered around gangster rap. It's the most promoted rap.
Yes.
People's grandma has heard of gangster rap. People's mamas have heard of gangster rap. A lot of people's mothers and grandmothers have never heard of knowledge rap. Again, not to say that, you know, one is good and one is bad.
Yes.
They both were two sides of the same coin being flipped in the air by the same devilish hand.
Yes. But one was clearly the incremental next stage of the other, right? So there is a reason why we make the distinction and why we put one as being worse than the other, because it's a deterioration. It's this type of lowering. It's the lowering of oneself, lowering of one's status or one's group or one's
and the other was an exaggerated elevating.
Exactly.
Right?
There we go. There we go. They both were extremely flawed, right? But we could see where we're at today. That trajectory, we could see like, okay, it just kind of flipped, and it's the loss of agency, regardless of how inflated and prideful the knowledge rap era was. At least there was some agency there, right?
Yes, it was.
Once you lose that agency, you just become food, and
yes, indeed.
Hence 2020.
And a lot of accountability too was present during the knowledge rap era. It was incumbent upon you to stop speaking broken English and to stop being ignorant about the world around you and what's happening in this world, and the governmental goings on, history. There was a sense of self-sufficiency.
Yes.
Even in the song Self-Destruction, that was one of the things that was promoted in the lyrics to Self-Destruction.
Yes.
In D Nice's verse, I believe it was, self-sufficient, independent, preach to teachers what rap intended, but society wants to invade. But do not walk this path that they laid. It's self-destruction.
Man, I love that song.
So
I had that video on VHS, and I would constantly watch it. I love that song. And there was nothing like that after that, really. Nothing really like. I think they tried it again, right? Didn't they have another one like later, years later?
What a West Coast made, we're all in the same gang.
That's what it was. We're all in the same gang. Yeah, that's right. Right.
But there were a lot of posse cuts, maybe not as well known, but there was a lot of posse cuts where guys got on there and they quote unquote flex knowledge, which again it was an exercise in pride of knowledge, pride of life. But as you said, it was still more positive.
Yeah.
And maybe being stuck in traffic for an hour is more positive than being stuck in traffic for 3 hours, but you're still stuck in traffic at the end of the day. And it's still thesis, antithesis, synthesis play at the end of the day.
Yes.
It's still the play of, let's play both ends against the middle, let's work both ends until we get to the middle. And now that's where we're at now, without a doubt. To where we look back at something as flawed as a knowledge rap, or something as imperfect and ungodly as conscious rap, and we can say, wow, it sure was better then. Something can be better, it's still not good.
Yes. Yes. And so what we see is, how is this being weaponized? Well, first you had to exploit an art form. But the problem is, through the exploitation of this art form, you're also exploiting a people, right? And
right.
that seemed to be the darkest aspect of this early on, say late 80s, early 90s. through this market growth, through this cultural development, through this new genre of music, this new aspect of culture that was huge. If you were to see this play out on MTV, you'd think this was a beautiful thing. But as you said, for some of us, when we see our communities changing overnight once this music comes out, you start to see the darker end, the weaponization. Now, some could argue, well, this was an indirect reaction or indirect result of this just massive growth of this music. You know, unfortunately, it lionized and glorified certain negativistic behaviors, criminality, thug mentality, like abuse of women, disrespect to women, all of these different negative things that seem to kind of change young men and, of course, change communities, change relationships, change an entire culture. But the weapon is seen even more when you see that the diffusion of this culture into the rest of the culture, into the suburbs, into the middle class, right? And into the bedroom communities and all of this and that. And that's where it gets interesting. So let's look at this these Oprah Winfrey clips, and we're going to see a little bit of this example. You're going to hear a little bit of all of these things we've been talking about from different people in the audience. And it's very interesting because the points they're bringing up are valid today. And it's interesting to see that this was 1990. So let's take a look here.
Yes, I want you to listen to some music lyrics, and I warn you that the lyrics are shocking and offensive to some and very, very, very explicit. But these are the lyrics of much of today's popular music, from rock and roll to rap, and they sell millions. These are platinum and gold albums, and believe me, your children who buy tapes and buy discs and records, who put Walkmans to their ears, know these very songs. The first group, a white rock group called Guns N' Roses, sold 3 million copies of this song. Listen.
Police and niggas, that's right. Get out of my way.
So
I remember that.
Yes.
I remember that, and I remember the fervor that it caused, and I remember Chuck D being one of the people who came out and talked about that.
Yes.
And made us aware that we should, quote unquote, that we of the hip hop community, quote unquote, at the time that I thought I was in, we should not support Guns N' Roses because they called us niggas on that song.
Yes, yes. So on this show, she discusses not just Ice-T, but also rock. And there is this element of negativistic cultural or behaviors on both types or on both sides. So it's not like the finger's only being pointed at hip hop. We see just as detrimental and degenerate activity going on in other forms of pop music. And I'll fast forward through some of this. We don't have to listen to all these songs here, but this is to make a point that it's clearly not just rap. It's just the messages in popular music in general tend to gravitate towards or revolve around base level things, whether that be sensuality, whether that be sexual, violent, as you stated, touch, things that physically get the body moving or emotionally. So
the devil is the prince of this world, and he knows what we like.
Yes.
We like things that feel good, and may I just add, because I see a lot of people mentioning this, that Slash
has been
Bitches out.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that Slash is reportedly, quote unquote, half black and quote unquote half white. But if that's truly so, then he wouldn't be the first person that's biracial, so to speak. And I hate that term, but he wouldn't be the first person that's got that sort of heritage who would side with white folks and not say something if there was some benefit to him being quiet and just playing the bass. So that doesn't shock or surprise me. And then there's also the larger agenda, which is to create controversy, especially during this time when I'm sure that Guns N' Roses record sales were suffering because of the growing record sales and record numbers that were being increased by young white kids' interest in this same music, as it to a lot of them at this time. Not talking about presently, but at the time when that Guns N' Roses song came out, and when Ice-T was doing his thing, and Ice Cube and NWA and them were big, and 2 Live Crew was big. It's also the time, and when Public Enemy was big, oddly enough, it's also the time when a lot of young white teenagers began to gravitate toward this, like their parents gravitated toward rock and roll as teenagers, because this music was telling them, you know, hearkening back to Ice-T and his form of rhyming. A lot of them liked Ice-T. And that's why you always saw him on a whole lot of talk shows, because white folks like to hear, well, what's going on in that place that my mom and dad tell me don't go to? My mom and dad tell me don't go across 8 Mile. Well, what's happening on 7 Mile? What's happening on 6 Mile? You know what's the big secret? And so it was the way for them to safely explore what was going on. And again, they weren't getting the whole picture, but should they have not gotten the bad news? Does a good newscaster only give you good news, or does a skilled weather reporter only tell you when it's sunny? So there may have been, you know, something at work that I've heard a lot of the elders talk about, where what the devil intends for bad, God can turn around and use for the good, where a lot of white kids who had never been exposed to black people actually, except maybe through what they saw in portrayals on TV and in the movies, but they didn't know any real live black folks. They were getting closer to understanding people that, you know, they were kept from understanding in many cases because of their upbringing and because of segregation.
Yes.
White folks live in one area, black folks live in another area. I'm from Detroit, one of the most segregated cities in America. The entire city is black, and you go across 8 Mile, and that's when you begin to see changes.
Yes.
Well, you know, 80 to 90% black. When I grew up, it was 98% black. But I said that to say, I saw this phenomenon. Again, it's a person that was following this music from the time it hit Detroit until the time it got to Tupac and all of this madness that we know of today. I followed this music. I watched the trends. I read the Source magazine. I saw what was happening in the hood. I saw what was happening when I crossed 8 Mile to go to work. You know, I heard what was being played from the cars. I saw the difference. There was a change in things, and part of that we can credit gangster rap for.
Yes.
The white kids wasn't listening to the knowledge rap, or at least the numbers weren't there to show that they were. But once they got a hold of the gangster rap, you know, it began to be a national threat. And then you had C. Dolores Tucker and all of the rest of them holding congressional meetings about this quote-unquote genre of music.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah, I remember that time, specifically 92 seemed to be that breakaway year. And I always go back to the Chronic album of Dr. Dre, because something about that album carries so much significance for me, because after that album, I just saw not only my community, but even just the culture seemed to change. I remember all of these drug kind of rap groups were coming out. Like there was a band, a rap band. All they did was rap about weed. What was the name of that group?
You talking about the ones that don't give me no Bammer weed?
That's RBL Posse. They're from San Francisco.
Okay.
That's like that's from like where I grew up. But there was this other band. Man, I feel like someone had mentioned them in the comments last time, but they were one of the first hip-hop groups or rap groups to come out just rapping about smoking weed. And it was
Cypress Hill?
Not Cypress Hill. They were one of them, of course, but it wasn't Cypress Hill. It was this other group. They weren't they ended up having like one big hit, I think. And then Loonies, of course, Dento being absolutely. I mean, I went to several Loonies concerts. I mean, I was a big fan of the Loonies. I mean, that's you know where I grew up. That was the thing. But Cypress Hill was huge too. They were part of that, big time. Cottonmouth Kings was part of it for sure, but that wasn't the band. It's this one group, and they came out with like one hit, and then they just kind of disappeared. But after that band, I mean, you started hearing all of this stuff. I remember when I went to Chicago that summer to visit family. My uncle used to always take me to the street vendors. Was it Total Devastation? I think it might have been Total Devastation, Donkey. I think that might have been. Yes, I think it was Total Devastation. That sounds right. Not Far Side. I loved Far Side. I remember when I went to in '92. I went to New York to visit family, and my uncle took me to this street. I think they call it Jewtown or something like that. And I remember buying tapes. I would always buy tapes there, and I got Quick is the Name, DJ Quick's album, and I got the Far Side, the Bizarre Ride, Far Side's first album. And I remember seeing Dr. Dre's the Chronic, and I didn't get it just because I don't know, I just didn't get it. But I remember seeing it everywhere, and I was like, oh, this is a new Dr. Dre album. And I remember seeing a leaf on the front, and I remember going to all of the stores, and there was all of these hats with marijuana leaves on them, and it was like a big thing.
I remember that too.
It was a huge thing. I remember everyone was wearing these hats, and I'm 12 years old. I'm just like, what is up with this? I've never seen, because I was used to wearing the African medallions. I mean, that's Bulls jerseys, short sets,
Yeah.
That's I was rocking short sets with like Bulls hats and some Forces, like that's
right.
That was this, and a starter parka, that's how I grew up as a kid. That's what was in. And then all of a sudden everybody's wearing these weed hats, with this leaf on it. I didn't understand what that was, because at that time people weren't smoking weed like that. Even in some of the more grimier areas, it just wasn't a thing really.
Nope. And it was much more underground type of thing. Like, if you smoked weed, you kind of kept it to yourself until you were around other people that smoked weed. That was the code of it.
Yes.
It wasn't something that you advertised.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Definitely. Exactly. It was kind of looked down upon, like something's wrong with you. Like you got a problem or something. Why are you doing drugs? Or it's like the uncles that were just on the, at the barbecues and stuff. They might go around and have a joint or something. It was like something like that. It wasn't like this thing where just everyone is just high all of the time.
And the rest of the family looked at those uncles side eye.
Yes.
Going back to the theme that we've been dealing with all night long, the incrementalism. It went from that uncle. I remember that uncle used to have to go upstairs in the attic or down in the basement or outside in the backyard and do it on the low.
Yes.
And not announce it. He didn't want nobody to know. And it went from that to, like you said, you could go to the liquor store, you could go to the corner store, you could go to the candy store and find something with a weed leaf on it, a hat or a T-shirt or something.
Yes.
This was, it's beyond coincidence to me how, again, these things, they have their corporate, or there's a corporate aspect to why these things get popular. But behind everything that happens in the carnal, there's always first a spiritual root. The spiritual aspect, was very obvious.
Yes. It
was to get pharmakia going on a wide scale. People had always been smoking weed. Reefer Madness is from the 50s or the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. Reefer Madness is an old movie. People have been smoking weed for a long time. Let me state the obvious. But we're not talking about what was done as the exception. We're talking about how the exception became the rule or the norm.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. That's why, for those that may be unfamiliar with, the black community and just so-called black culture, the black experience, things were a lot different not very long ago. You just see all of the drug use, the just this constant sense of being high all the time. Everybody being so high. This is so abnormal. Growing up, you never saw this type of thing. As you stated, it was looked down upon.
Yes, that's right. It was looked down. You would be ashamed to let your mama and your grandma and your aunties see you red-eyed, even though your mama and your auntie smoked.
Yes.
it was something that you would be ashamed of. You didn't want them to see you in a certain light. You didn't want to be seen as no thug. I also can recall going right along with this, and then I'm going to shut up. I also recall at the same time not seeing tattoos until after that was brought to bear through Tupac and Jodeci.
Great point.
I marked it in my mind because I never knew no brothers with no tattoo. I'm talking about I knew some killers growing up in the dope dealing age of Detroit, you know, when crack was rampant. I had a lot of friends who was in the street. None of them had tattoos. It was not a thing, at least not in Detroit. Maybe it was different in LA or in New York. But in Detroit, it wasn't a thing until after Tupac and Jodeci. Wow. Those were, and it looked odd to me to see them tatted up, to see a black person, I'm just going to say it, with tats all over their body was an odd thing, unless you're talking about your uncle that came home from the joint and he might have a prison tattoo on his arm, or you're talking about somebody who served in the military. They might have a tattoo on their shoulder, on their arm, or somebody that was in a fraternity. Again, it existed, but those were the exceptions, yes, not the rule. Now it's rare to see somebody of a certain age group without a tattoo.
Ooh. Yes, see, the incrementalism, the inversion, the flipping of it, the flipping to, flipping one on their head, right? This is just that right there. Great point. Tattoos. I mean, I'm going to tell you, growing up, the only people from where I was from, you were in a gang if you had a tattoo. You had your gang symbolism, or you were in prison. Really, that's the only reason people would have tattoos for the most part, or old military men would have tattoos, of course. But as far as the younger men, it usually was directly associated with gang activity. And that was it. It wasn't fashionable. Yes. It was not fashionable. Great point. So we have this mixture, and personally, I have tattoos, but I do personally believe tattoos do play a type of role in spirituality. There is and this is just my own view, but there could be a conjuring going on through tatting of one's body, through almost sigil magic in a sense, because when you put tats on your body, it changes the way you feel about yourself. You kind of take on a new persona, and I think many people, especially these younger types today, tatting on their face and all over their necks and stuff, they're taking on a new identity through this symbolism.
Well, brother, you're not just whistling Dixie, and that's not just a good guess. The occult origins of tattoo does have to do with necromancy and the writing on dead bodies to reanimate them. The things that you would write on to a body would be spells and curses to reanimate the body. That's the origin of tattoos, and that's why we're not supposed to do it. And yes, when you etch something into your flesh, you become bound to that thing. It's one reason why they want to give you a tattoo in the military. They want you to have a tattoo or a brand if you're in the fraternal or the sororal systems. They want you to be bound by these things, by these spirits. And just because a person doesn't believe that that's what's happening to them doesn't change the fact that the spirits believe that's what's happening to you.
Yes. And of course, I regret getting them, but in college, I did get tatted up quite a bit. So, you make mistakes when you're young, but I definitely do, even in my own experience, remember a type of it just changes you in a very strange and odd way. And now I definitely do understand why Scripture teaches against it. And yes, so the tattoos, the Weed Smoke, 1992, the Chronic album. From there, and it was Total Devastation. That was the group I was thinking of. They had one very, very popular song, which was very big on the West Coast. I don't know if it really got national, but they were huge. And of course, the Loonies and there was Cypress Hill, and then the group, the Alcoholics, would come out. So it wasn't just weed, but also alcohol became huge. Now, some people might not know this, but a very large percentage of the music industry, specifically hip hop producing music organizations, are owned by Seagrams. And
yes, sir.
And for those for those who don't know what Seagrams is a massive multinational company that makes gins and vodkas and all types of different drinks. And what did you see all over the place? I had posters on my wall at 12 years old. St. Ides. I had St. Ides posters. We had the Ice Cube St. Ides and the Snoop Dogg St. Ides campaigns. Do you remember those?
Yes, I do. I remember the commercials were so fresh that they put out tapes of the St. Ides commercials you could actually get from the liquor stores. You could get the tape. Rakim and Eric B had one. That's commercial. So many groups had St. Ides commercials and helped to promote drinking, because those of us who were old enough to like the music weren't necessarily old enough to drink. And it's what started me. I started drinking 40 ounces.
Yes.
Because of listening to this music.
8th grade, I did the same thing. It was because of this. It was what influenced us. We saw this. We saw it in the movies. The 40 became this thing. You know, it was just normalized, especially in the more of the inner cities and more of the quote unquote hoods. This became part of the culture. It was almost symbolism of where where you're from, or what you're down with, or what culture you're part of. It became a part of culture, similar to how the double cup today is a part of the culture. You see a lot of guys in these.
You're absolutely right.
It's like they have to hold this cup. This cup it symbolizes a type of manhood, a type of bravado.
Yes, it did. That's far too much beer for one person to sit up and drink, let alone. You didn't drink 140. Now, you know, thank God that the Lord forgives us for things that we did in our youth, like tattoos. Though I don't have no tattoos bonded to me, I sure enough got a beer belly bonded to me from what I did in my 20s, drinking them 40s to prove myself, you know, in front of my friends. We all sitting around drinking 40 ounces of not beer, but something very different, malt liquor.
Yes.
Something that you couldn't buy across 8 Mile. You could only buy that in the hood.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew that
because
my friends who happened to have situations that would take them to live across 8 Mile, they would have to come to the hood to get malt liquor, to get St. Ides and Old English,
yes.
Power Master,
yes,
Cokie 900.
Yes. Mad Dog 2020 was something that we would frequently drink. And I just remember all the times you get sick from this stuff. And you know, you just continue to do it. And it just blows me away how stupid we can be when we're young. But you think about back then when we were doing these things. And, you know, we had so many limits. We had so many barriers to keep us from really falling all the way in. Now a lot of that stuff has disappeared. Now it's just a lot easier for kids to wild out. Tyra Faizan, shout out to Tyra. She says, she brings up Alizé, which is another one that was, for us, we got into it because of Tupac. You know, he put it in songs. And what's Alizé? Yeah. We see this blue drink, and we was buying that and drinking that. And later, much later, Mano Munoz, the Four Locos, that was much later. But yeah, that's another one. You know, so it's just
Thug Passion.
Thug Passion. There we go. That's what Hennessy, and Alizé. Yes.
Right.
Yes. I mean, this was how we grew up, you know, and this is why, for some of us, this culture is important to discuss, because it formed many of us at certain times in our lives. You know, and this is why I brought up the difference between different communities. Some communities listen to music because it's just entertainment. But in other communities, this is our life. This is how we live. Yes. This is the soundtrack to our real existence. And we directly identify behaviorally with this music, not just in this detached entertainment kind of way. So
there you go, brother.
There is an importance about that there, because it's detrimental. It truly is. So it's
that makes it hit a little different.
It hits a lot different, right?
Yeah,
a lot different. So I'm saying all of this because we see this, as you said, incrementalism. We see this slow march towards deeper and deeper degeneracy, through the introduction of spirits and becoming intoxicated was normalized and popularized and became part of the culture.
Yes.
That's why when we see these kids today, you know, poor kids, you know, strung out on opiates and, you know, the double cup sipping
Have mercy.
cough syrup, you know, doing all these pills now. And so for us, what we talk about, it pales in comparison, right? I mean, we were just drinking a little alcohol, maybe smoking a little weed here and there. But I mean, these kids now, they're strung out. It's like Skid Row and all over the place. And it's really sad, but there was a development. It got here through a long developmental period, a long process. And it really started with this post-1992 break into the break that happened. Marijuana and alcohol became a cultural, almost a cornerstone in many ways for this industry and for this culture. Gin and juice came out. I remember when. What
does Snoop say? I had to back up off of it and sit myself down. Tanqueray and Chronic. Now I'm messed up now.
Oh yes. And I remember the DJ Quick song Tonight. That was one of the first songs.
Oh my God.
That was one of the first songs that had me like thinking about, like, you know, getting drunk. Like,
Lord forgive us. Yes indeed.
That was never really in my mind. I mean, even Too Short and some of these earlier artists didn't really rap a whole lot about that. Now, of course, they had other horrible things they were rapping about, but getting drunk and getting high and becoming intoxicated was never really a theme.
Thing.
DJ
wasn't. Quick made that look like the thing to do on a Friday night. Was to put on DJ Quick's music and drink some 40s.
Yes. And I never identified with that. You know, Lord, I didn't come from a family that really drank. Well, my parents had some wine and some beer here and there, but I was never really around alcoholism per se. Of course, I had friends and family members that were involved with that, but it wasn't something that I was really, really used to or around a whole lot. So I never had the proclivity for that or the desire for that. So I remember when I would first hear these messages as a youth, you know, 12, 13, 14 years old, it was very foreign to me as far as I wasn't really interested in it. I wasn't like, oh, I want to do this to be cool. It just kind of happened. All of a sudden, my friends are got bottles and, you know, we're meeting up and people are breaking out bottles and, you know, you just try things and one thing leads to another. And it's amazing to me how that just transpired. It was such an interesting time. And for us, we look back at it as, you know, aspects of our past that we probably regret, though we understand we learn from them. It's a part of life. It's a part of, becoming a man or whatever, just growing and developing. You make mistakes, blah, 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 blah. But then we see what's really going on today. And it's like, wow.
And we realized it was bigger than us. It was much bigger.
Wow.
It was a grand agenda going on.
Yes. So,
and you know, it's sad, but it does prove that what the Bible says is true in many scriptures, from filthy communication corrupts good manners, to, you know, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Feeding these things of the flesh, you know, like the devil tends to do. It's an incremental thing. He starts you off with a small thing, you know, maybe just a can of beer, and then he graduates you to a 40, and then he graduates you to liquor, and then he takes you from liquor, because liquor is quicker, to pills. And he did that with this genre. You know, which shows and proves to me that from the very beginning, whether Too Short intended these things or not, or whether DJ Quick intended this or not, has nothing to do with it. It's showing and proving that contrary to what Karis One and others would like for you to think and believe, there is a spirit and a religion or a fifth element to hip hop, and it's not a godly spirit. And the religion is not a religion of the true and living God.
Indeed.
You know. It's certainly the devil's religion, like the devil is the prince of this world. The alcohol is called spirits. You know, when you cross 8 Mile and go to other bars, you see on the side of those bars, says it flat out, wine and spirits.
Yes.
You know,
Miss T brings up a good point, and when we discuss this, this isn't to say that this was the first time, drugs or of any kind were promoted through music. Yes, absolutely. The 70s and precisely in the 60s, to the whole counterculture, much harsher forms of drugs, specifically psychedelics and even heroin and these types of things were a big part of the culture. So there's that history too. But that was it was pretty popular. Of course I didn't live then, so I can't speak so much to it because I didn't actually experience it like I did with the early 90s. But from what I've learned and from what I've learned from others, that to a degree was more of an isolated movement, right? This counterculture. It was more of a microcosm in itself. But again, I didn't live then, so I can't speak too much to it. And I do know, of course, it had a horrible result, right? I mean, we saw where things went. Things went right into the Coke era, right? And the pills and all of that, and in the disco and new wave era and Studio 54. So things just kind of escalated, right, from then. And if we want to get real technical, I guess we can go back to Prohibition, right? And that whole thing.
But like we've been saying all night long, and we will continue to say until everybody understands it, is that we're not talking about the existence of something beginning through hip hop or music or some particular counterculture. We're talking about the incremental increasing of what was once done in the darkness being brought out into the light, where everyone, or at least where the majority of people are doing it. Like we said about tattoos, like we said about a number of things tonight, gangster music, like we said about bad boys and bad girls and the people that like them. These things, like we said about slasher movies, these things have always existed, but what we have to notice is that over time, the existence went from being something done in the closet, something that people looked at as odd, weird, or queer, into now being the norm. And that's how you degrade a society. That's proof of the devil being prince of this world, God of the age.
Yes. And I think we need to, as you said perfectly, it's the increasing of this. Then with that being said, let's ask, what is increasing the usage? I think anyone that abuses any type of substance has an emotional problem, period. Now, some of us didn't get involved with these substances because we had emotional issues. It was pure curiosity, at least during my time. For us, we were just experimenting. Some of us got hooked on these things, and it became a real lifestyle, which I would relate to emotional problems. Some of us, like myself, tried it for a little bit, had a little fun, left it alone. Though, you get into other things and you start trying other things. It's a gateway. I walked down that path. I understand how that works. But everybody doesn't get hooked on these things, or at least maybe not for very long or for a short period. The point being, we all have, to a degree, some kind of emotional issue. And when we tap that dopamine, when we tap that serotonin, when we tap those areas, GABA or whatever drug you're using, whatever it's tapping, we tap into that void. And sometimes those substances make you feel a little better. Sometimes they soothe that void a little bit, and sometimes we get a little bit too wrapped up with that. But what we're seeing today is an increase in the use. So what would that say? There's an increase in emotional problems. What I'm getting at is the foundation of this point being, young people today are detached from themselves, detached from God, detached from reality, and emotionally broken. Parents are struggling these days. Families are breaking apart. Society is in a position where chaos is just increasing. Therefore, the use of substances is increasing. This is why we see, not just because there's more drugs available. Drugs have always been available, though I will agree they are probably more available and easier to get today, at least in certain areas. But young people are more willing to associate themselves with drugs. And I think a lot of this has to do with the music, with the culture as a gateway but then you mix in the increase in emotional problems, which just provides you the grounds and the foundation for a pandemic, in a sense, a cultural drug-infested pandemic, which is what we are experiencing right now. So I want to make that clear, that I think what this is saying, or what this is showing, is how disillusioned young people are today, and not just young people, all people. This goes across the board. This is a national situation, something that's happening all over throughout different demographics. So there's many variables at play, right? But
just a crisis, definitely.
It's a crisis,
a spiritual crisis.
Yes, and kids today, I mean, they're doing all types of crazy stuff. I mean, one of the movements now is huffing gas and different and whippets and stuff like that. I mean, that was big in the rave days. I remember that. But now you see gangsters doing this stuff with balloons and stuff. It's crazy. It's insane. But anything to get high, anything to get out of this world, anything to escape reality and feel something. Some people are so numb, they just want to feel something.
Feel something. Even if it's a fleeting feeling and a false sense of comfort, and you know, we can also relate these things, as you know, we listed them as things that once were done by people, things that have been done by people for decades, but you know, were things that were done in the closet, or things that were done sparingly, and now it's popular and most people do them. We can also add pornography to that. And we can also point to one reason why the increase of use of drugs, or younger people using harder drugs, more negative themes in the music, more consumption of pornography, more consumption of alcohol, more normalization of the things that are bad. We can also say that as the presence of God decreases in men's and women's lives, as the presence of God is banned more from school and from places where children would congregate, as the image of God and as the teachings of Christ are derided more and more through television and through the movies and through music, you know, things like Family Guy and South Park, which I know those are old school now, but you know, those cartoons help to make it a trendy thing to clown the image of the Messiah. And as these things get to be trendy, things that have always been done, there's always been folks that clowned the Messiah. Aleister Crowley been around for decades, or rather his teachings have been around for decades. So it's not a new thing that people deride Christ. It's a new thing that nobody's looking side-eyed at it anymore. It's a new thing that it's no longer queer to be antichrist. It's a new thing that the black community is growing in acceptance of being anti-Christian. These things that once existed as evil is nothing new under the sun, you know, whether we're talking good or evil, these things did exist, but they were buried. They were in the closet. There were small numbers of people who engaged in them. There was a small number of folks who turned their back on the church. There was a small number of people who were against praying in school. Now we have seen a switch 180 degrees to where the majority of parents probably would tell you they do not want prayer in schools.
Yes.
And, you know, we can make a correlation, you know, as less God is promoted in the world, more devil is promoted in the world. And that's part of why you have this young man, Montero Hill, coming out and promoting his satanic sneaker and his satanic videos and ideals around the time of Passover. You know, that can't be ignored, because it shows and proves to anyone who has a doubt that Jesus is real, it proves to you that the devil knows he's real, even if you do not. Because the devil likes to do things to deride Christ. Why would you make fun of something or deride something that's not real? Simply to troll people? That's, that excuse can only satisfy a person's unbelief for so long.
Yes.
After you become so mature in looking at the world around you, you will understand that the devil is real. And for some people like myself, it was that helped me to understand that God is real, that Jesus is real and is on the throne. And he is who we should be talking about and focusing on to have peace in this world. He is in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on the Lord. So we have to talk about these things because they should not be ignored. We're told not to be ignorant of the devil's devices. And he has made us watchmen on the wall. So, when the whole world is talking about a thing, you and I talked privately, and we both agreed we didn't want to talk about this guy. We didn't want to give him what he was obviously out to get. Mm-hmm. And certainly we didn't want to give his master what his master was out to get. We wanted to, if we could, add something to the conversation to help to steer things back in the Christ direction. Because if the only people who talk about these things are people who are not speaking from a biblical point of view or with a biblical worldview, then that makes us look like, to the young people who need to hear these types of things discussed, that makes us look like that we're not in the know, or that we're somehow behind the times. We lack understanding. So we have to talk about these things, and we have to do so strategically, because the devil plays chess, not checkers, baby. And it's time now that the church stop playing checkers and play chess and think strategically. Be able to come out of the Christianese sayings that make us comfortable. Oh, well, I don't see color. Oh, well, I'll just pray for him. Oh, well, just talk about Jesus. Jesus didn't just stand there and read off scrolls. He had scrolls to read. He talked about things that the people could relate to. And this helped them have understanding to enable them to take the responsibility to make changes in their lives, work out their own soul salvation with fear and trembling. So that's what we talk about these things. It's a lot of other things that Brother Dayz would much rather talk about, and so would I. And most certainly, we always want to bring the conversation back to the only thing worth having conversation about, and that's our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. But in order to do so and to win the lost, as Jesus said he was concerned for the lost sheep, we have to be able to understand, well, what does the wilderness look like that the lost are lost in? And how can we go into that wilderness and pull them out? And it takes a little bit of back engineering sometimes, looking at, well, how did we get in this place in space? And I thank you, brother, for, opening up your forum to have these type of talks where we can look back and see, well, the Sankofa of it all.
Yes.
Let's go back and get it. Well, how did we end up here?
Yes.
Let's go back and get the knowledge and find out.
Absolutely. And Kobe Brewster says it perfectly here. Shout out to Brother Kobe. Exactly. They want to make it seem like Christians are being outdated, or their understanding or compassion, or they would say we're closed-minded. Yes. I mean, this is the goal. So precisely, and this is why we discuss these things, because we're living in an era where the younger generations are disconnected and detached, one, from a meta-narrative to give themselves an understanding of why things are the way they are, but also from the basic tradition of morality and decency. These kind of things to the younger generation today are outdated or prude, right? Having a type of base and standard of moral behavior and having parameters that keep your behavior within some type of standardized area that makes you that gives you dignity and integrity. These concepts are old hat today. And this is why we have to discuss these things. And you said if we really would like to always just bring it back to Christ, of course. Absolutely, brother. But if Christ is the truth, if Christ is the word, but the generations today don't understand words and aren't interested in truth, how can we talk about Christ? They don't want to hear any of that. So we do have to kind of back engineer, right? We do have to kind of take things back. We do have to give history lessons. We do have to describe the trajectory, the progress so-called, the evolution so-called of this postmodern era. See, just postmodernism in general teaches one so much when you understand pre-modernism, when you understand modernism and the direction towards postmodernism. And when you see how things developed through those eras, when you see how things changed culturally, economically, socially, familial exchange, genetics, everything, demographics, when you see how all of these things transpired through these different eras, you'll discover we are in some serious trouble.
Yes, Lord.
You're worried about people, not being open-minded. You're worried about people saying what your lifestyle is wrong. It shows how myopic all of this truly is. It's just these young people today, and not even just the young people, all of us, a lot of us, are just stuck in our bubbles, and we just want our things. We just want to feel good, right? And it does tend to be a little more exaggerated on the younger side because they are so far removed from any sense of tradition, from any sense of enduring truth, right? Everything's immediate with the younger generations today. So it's hard to get through to these types, especially with anything moral. They're so far removed for the simple concept of morality that it's hard to even communicate these things to them. So it's very important that we talk about this stuff and try to give some foundation to it so they can have something to sink their teeth in. If you just beat somebody over the head with the Bible, they're probably not going to listen to you. I know I wouldn't have listened to that prior to my being saved. I didn't.
Lord knows I didn't.
So we have to be honest about this. I mean, there is a pandemic of drug use and drug abuse, but there's also a pandemic of just pure ignorance and indifference, right?
And lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge, just apathy, short attention spans, lack of attention at all.
Yes, Lord.
It's all about pornography and, getting attention. That's really what motivates a large percentage of, say, those under 25, between 16 and 25 today. I have to be completely honest.
Yes, sir.
This is what is motivating this population of young people today.
Instant gratification.
This is a crisis of proportions most people could never even imagine if they knew how all of this developed. That's why we do this work. We understand this has to be done. It's not easy. Trust me. It gets dark at times, but this is what it is, man. We are in tough times, and we've been going on, and we haven't even got through these clips. Let's get into this clip here. We're gonna get through at least a couple of these.
Sir.
Are you good for a little more time? We're gonna run it tonight.
Wild horses couldn't drag me away.
All right, let's do this. All right. Sorry, guys. Here we go. Let's get into some of these clips and address some of these points and listen to these arguments and see how pertinent they are for the day and age.
I am sure, Juan, from your article, that a lot of people who are watching this show, and there are at least 20 million people in America watching, not to mention the United Kingdom and other places in the world, who probably were not aware that such lyrics were available to the public.
Well, it's one of the things that the way we do music today, especially with the Walkmans, as you said, as you started the show, a lot of times parents aren't aware what the kids are listening to. The kids are listening, tuned into certain things, hearing these lyrics, responding to them, thinking of them as really anthems for their generation and their sort of rebellion, and tapping into all the hatred and resentments these kids have, And that's the way the music industry today seems to be feeding off of it, making money off of those instincts, rather than, if you think back to the 60s, the instincts about peace, love, and live together.
Why do you say then, though, that it is a national disgrace? Because you are a writer for a very prominent newspaper, the Washington Post, and it is because of freedom of speech that you are allowed to write some of the things that you do.
Oh, absolutely, Oprah. But you got to understand that this isn't really a censorship issue. It's not about freedom of speech. What it's about is no one is going to say that Ice-T or any other rapper can't make his song. He can make his song, but I think that parents, I think that children, the society as a whole, has to be aware when you have such a malevolent, evil influence going out there affecting young people, and somebody needs to stand up and say that it's not about beating a bitch, or it's not about hating Jews, and it's not about killing police that's going to solve problems or bring people together. That this kind of attitude really drives us apart and creates social issues and social problems. What happens, however, today is that people tend to not want to say that. They say, hey, well, listen, if I come out of my bag and say, hey, I don't like this, then I'm going to get labeled as a censor and like a conservative and a crazy person. And so that they don't say anything, and the rappers keep going on, making their money, spreading their evil intent.
Do you have evil intent, Ice-T?
I don't have evil intent. I just make records in the format that, you know, me and my homeboys talk, you know what I'm saying? And, I mean, what I say on that record, what you heard, I didn't hear anything different than that in the movie Harlem Nights or anything. What I do is I bring out how brothers on the corner talk. Now, I might be wrong, but I can't talk any other way than I know how to talk. If I had to grow up like Brian Gumble, I'd rap like Brian Gumble.
We got to talk about we got to talk about this one. This is just the very basic, and he really contradicted himself here, didn't he? Because
yes, he did.
Go ahead.
No. You can set it up, brother.
Okay. So this is what you're going to get in general. This is kind of the basic argument. Product of my environment.
I can't do no better.
I can't do no better. This drives me crazy. Now he's younger, I guess, maybe in his early 20s, mid 20s. I'm not really sure, honestly. But extremely ignorant argument here, right? It's like, come on. So basically, it absolves one of any moral or ethical responsibility for the messages being given to troubled youth, right? So what this does is he's saying, I'm a product of my environment. I'm only saying I only speak how I know how to speak. And he's like, if I lived like Brian Gumble, I'd be speaking like Brian Gumble, as if your environment determines who and what you are going to be indefinitely or in a permanent sense, right? Now, though your environment does set up preconditions for you that will indeed influence you in certain ways and provide a precondition set for you to make choices within, keyword choices. Yeah, your environment will provide that, but you are still an individual, an agent that has the ability to think for himself and make decisions. And I would argue that one thing that is needed in this decision making is a level of morality and ethics. And when one has some semblance of morality and ethics, even within certain environments that do give you a precondition of trauma, you will be better off in that your ethics and your moral groundings will strengthen your reasoning abilities, mainly providing some sense of wisdom in your decision making. And when you make these claims, what you're doing is you are totally disregarding that ethic and moral aspect of life, of decision making. It's almost as if you are this automaton who is pre-programmed by his environment, and you only know how to act through which or by the system that the environment has downloaded into you, as if you are some type of machine.
Brother, first of all, I concur. That's right and exact. Very well stated. Also, I recognized Juan, the writer, that she was speaking to, the brother, figuratively speaking, in the red tie.
Yes.
He's been caping and timing for a long time, I see. He works for CNN now.
Yes. Yep.
So he's been a talking head go-to for a long time. And even on that stage, I see the Hegelian dialectic set up. We're probably backstage behind closed doors. They gave each other the handshake or the sacred word and broke bread together. I'm sure of it. With Oprah as the facilitator for such a meeting. This is brotherhood business 101. Whatever Ice-T was is what Tupac became the newer version of. They have too many similarities. Ice-T is from New York. He moved to L.A. He even said that in the intro to Rhyme Pays. He, that was in the lines. The lines escape me now. If I had have thought about it before we got on the air, I would have remembered those lines. But for the intro of he was born in Brooklyn, I think, but he's from New York, moved out to L.A. A lot of the Los Angeles or a lot of the Cali gangsters have given him a hard time over the years for him not being able to show and prove what set he was from. Then there's this aspect. He talks about, if I talk like Bryant Gumbel, I rap like Bryant Gumbel, something to that effect. Ice-T spoke pretty well. There are some brothers who may have been able to use that flawed logic because it was flawed for a lot of reasons. But the main reason it was flawed coming out of Ice-T's mouth was because his vocabulary and his ability to deliver was very commercial oriented. He had been making records for a long time, and he understood how to talk to a wide audience of people. Yes. Even his breakdancing record from back in the breakdancing era before his gangster rap days called Reckless, He's Reckless. Yes. That right there showed and proved he knows how to speak quite properly if called upon to do so. It was part of the character that he played, much like Tupac played a character. They both were able to speak in a way that could come across very differently depending on who they were speaking to. I don't think that's by coincidence. No. And so whatever it was that Ice-T was back in the day, meaning whatever type of plant, if he was a COINTELPRO military plant or whatever the case may be, I believe he was an MK Ultra plant in the record business. Tupac was the next generation of that. Now, also, he was lying to keep them dollars coming in. Yes. Giving a plausible excuse in front of an audience of people that don't know no better. Now, you put him in front of some real gangsters who speak broken English because that is the best that they can do. And you wouldn't have heard the crowd cheer, you would have heard the crowd boo. Yes. Yes. Then, he's sitting up there speaking for a community that has that's not a monolith, unlike a lot of folks think. A lot of folks think all black folks think alike and talk alike. Oh, well, sometimes you'll have someone ask you, oh, well, do you guys do such and such? And I tell them flatly, well, I can tell you what I do. Yeah. But he's speaking for people as if the gangster experience that he fabricated mostly and wrote about was the black experience. He was speaking for a counterculture, a subculture, if you will, within a larger scope of what the black neighborhood was. There, in the black neighborhood, there's always been a strong church presence. He was not speaking for them. Yes. There's always been a strong presence of blue-collar work ethic. He was not speaking for them. There's also always been a long and well-known history of brothers and sisters who take pride in their history. Yes. And he certainly was not speaking for them. Yes. So he was speaking for this little segment of our community and, doing so disingenuously as that and lying, on national TV and giving the world folks who didn't know about what really went on in our households, folks who didn't really live around or with black families. They got an impression, oh, okay, this is how you guys are. Again, Not everybody. There's exceptions to the rule. But as a rule, a lot of people got to know and believe that, hey, this is what it's like in the hood. And you would know this by, going on jobs and in certain situations where, like for me, I'm across 8 Mile and my coworker happens to be white, and to try to relate to me, he speaks to me as if, this is my life and my reality. You know what I mean? Because that's his point of reference. And, that's not to criticize the man for trying. It's good for a person to try, but this is just to show the effect that things like Ice-T going on Oprah and talking this garbage would have on black and white relations, quote unquote.
Very well said. I agree. And
Glory to God.
And to be clear, I don't want to make it appear as if I am addressing what Ice-T is saying here in a way that would suggest I believe he is sincere in his response. Okay, because he is really, this is all an act, right?
Yes.
This is a completely an act, but his response is a very genuine one for many people just in the everyday world. So this is a genuine response, I'd say, for many people. So I think it's still good to address it and try to refute it. But I don't want to make it seem as if I think he's being sincere, because I don't. I'm just attacking the argument for the argument's sake. And also, it's unfortunate, but you're correct in what you say regarding the idea of the monolith, right? As if the black people, there's this monolith of us where we all come from the same kind of thing. It's historical. Media has a lot to do with it. There's many variables at play, but one of the main things is the idea of a black identity, and the structure of the black identity, which doesn't exist, okay, because we all are different. We all have our own identities. Yes, people share the same, possibly demographic, ethnic group, gene pool, so-called race or phenotype, genotype, etc. But identity is subjective. And identity is developed through one's experience in the world, and all that plays in there. So this idea of black identity doesn't exist, but especially from those that say non-blacks perceive that there does exist a black identity. And you will also find that in the black community, so-called, where that certain individuals believe that there is some type of black identity, some monolithic black identity that has to entail a certain type of speech, a certain vocabulary usage, and a certain delivery of speech, as well as a behavioral set that has to do with maybe the way you walk, the way you move, this essence, right? Now, I do understand there is a rhythmic tendency or rhythmic element to black people, that I do know. Yes, we can dance. Yes, we got some rhythm. This is just part of who we are. I think this goes back. Who knows where this comes from? That I can agree with. There is these elements of rhythm. There are these elements of, some might say, swag or whatever. These things do have their place. But overall, there's no such thing as black identity. And unfortunately, people put they put you in this box, and if you don't fit these behavioral sets that are attributed to the black identity, therefore you are behaving as non-black in some sense. And what's worse is non-black usually means something positive, and things attributed to black identity tend to be more negative. Right?
Stop acting black and don't be so ghetto.
Right? And it gets as bad as articulation becomes something attributed to and exclusive to a race of people. Hence,
why you talk so white?
Talking white. I mean, just the ignorance there. It's so deep. It's hard to even, educate or explain this to someone who's in that hole. But this is very common, unfortunately. It truly is.
And it's perpetuated through our segregation, because what I find is, I like how you said that the monolithic idea even exists among blacks. What I find is the more quote unquote black folks that you've been exposed to, the more the idea of the black monolith dissipates and crumbles as it is.
There it is.
Because you begin to see this wide range. Yes, it's some gangsters in my family. It's some educators in my family. It's some administrators in my family. It's some ex-cons in my family. It's some great family men in my family. Some hardworking blue-collar guys in my family. It's some sold out for the Lord, holy roller Christian soldier saints in my family. And that's not the case in every family. In some families, and again, the more exposure that you have to quote unquote black folks, the more you see this wide range of people. I mean, I know some black folks that, would put you to shame if you saw them on the dance floor. They give us a bad name,
Yes.
So, the more black folks that the more you see, oh, wow, y'all have all sorts of ideas and ideals. You guys come from all sorts of backgrounds. There have been rich people in my family, and there have been folks that grew up in the projects in my family. So there's this wide range of experience that does not get expressed because the media loves to cover and project one part of that experience, or the so-called artists and entertainers are only allowed to put forth and present to the public at large the worst part of that experience. Yes. Or that particular segment, as we've been talking all night about things that do exist and the negatives that do exist, but how those negatives were not highlighted. Well, now, and really for a long time, and through the media, it can't be denied that there is a preference for the media, and a person can philosophize about why the preference exists, but for now, we'll say it's because it's what the devil wants. But there is a preference in the media to project these negative images and these negative stereotypes of this negative monolith, such as the caricature of the black woman who gets interviewed during a news broadcast, and she's got her her shower cap on her head and looking like a hot mess out there using broken English. That caricature is more advantageous for certain thought processes to continue, which is by the devil's delight, and plays right into his chessboard game of black versus white.
Absolutely.
As we also have to touch on the Floyd trials tonight.
Yes. And, and to avoid this value judgments, this isn't to say that speaking one way opposed to another has a higher value. That's another mistake people make.
Yes, indeed.
As if, I look at speech patterns, for one, have a lot to do with region. Okay, because if you go to parts of the South, you're going to see a type of speech pattern that's more prevalent than, say, going to the Northwest, right? So
even among somebody with a doctorate.
Exactly, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I have uncles, that, are educated men, but they don't necessarily speak, in what some would call an educated way. It doesn't mean they don't know a whole lot. It doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. They're very intelligent, but they just, who knows why people speak the way they do in many ways. But I will say it really depends on the environment. And I'd say, I just say for myself, anybody that spends a lot of time reading, like a lot, your language will change. You will use more words. You just will. Anybody that studies under, say, if you're listening to a certain type of hip-hop music that's, say, very, some of the worst kinds, and that's all you really put in your brain, you're probably going to speak that way. But if you're listening to all types of different teachers, educators, preachers, all different types of minds, constantly speaking on things of all types of natures, constantly reading, you're going to kind of inherit some of that. just by osmosis. So, I mean, I really think region has probably most to do with it, but it's also what you experience in your life. And these are things that people just generally, I'd say, probably don't think about when they make these kind of distinctions between what is black perceived and what is white perceived, as if, you know, there's some value judgment there too, which I think is a big problem. And
oh yes, there is.
Just like
a whole lot of people make the mistake of thinking that because you speak quote unquote properly, that you're more intelligent than someone who speaks with more broken English. And I have found that to be a very deceptive misunderstanding in life. I've known some very intelligent people who didn't have a great grasp of reading, writing, and arithmetic, but they were so much more intelligent than I was. You know, their understanding of people and the way the world worked was much greater than my own. You know, although I considered myself to have been successful in my scholarly pursuits, I've had the Lord show me that, you know, that's not the mark of intelligence. And, you know, just because somebody speaks real soft and quote unquote proper, that does not mean that they have great intelligence.
Oh, yes.
This is something that you learn also by training.
Yes.
You know, where did you come from?
Yes.
Who do you still speak to? Now, for instance, I know people who leave their environment and go into another environment, and it changes their delivery.
Boom.
And I also know people who receive their doctorate and still deal with folks from the environment that they grew up in, and they can talk like gangsters. So, or their vocal inflection and their delivery shows and proves that they are quote unquote aware of the slang and the colloquialisms that a lot of their peers would use. So, you know, it is a regional thing, and it is a thing that that people have a lot of misconceptions about. You know, people misconstrue.
They do. They misconstrue properly. They misconstrue proper English with intelligence. That everyone doesn't do that. I don't want to be too general with that statement, but this happens, and that's a big mistake, especially in our community. That I think this is more of an issue we deal with. Properly spoken English can sometimes be misconstrued as one attempting to be intelligent or acting as if they were non-black in some way, without addressing the ideas. I mean, though intelligence should never be viewed as something that's of high value, I think it does have its purpose. But I mean, right. I think it should be assessed by way of the type of ideas and the structure of those ideas opposed to the structure of one's speech patterns. Now, I also want to say with region comes environment. Environment and region, they come together, but environment would probably be more important because environment is directly where one learns how to speak. And some individuals grow up in homes where there's a lot of speaking. There's a lot of discourse. And if that discourse is rich in its word usage, then that child is going to grow up. I don't care what race they are. I don't care. They're going to grow up with a more articulate way of speaking just based on what they're mirroring as children. And the opposite happens in families where people don't really talk a whole lot. You know, they might not have the same talking ability. And then there's genetics that play a role, even growing up in a home where people don't talk a lot or maybe have broken English. And one of those children grow up to be extremely articulate. Could have to do with the expression of their genes that they specifically had. You know, a lot of factors. You know, I've experienced that in my own life, you know, so I do understand that these things are real. You can be an anomaly in your family. You truly can. So really, even if environment doesn't always make the call. There's a really good book. I can't remember her name, but it's basically a book about how genes in many cases form the child. or at least have a stronger influence than environment. I don't agree with the whole book, but I think she makes some good points that even in a certain environment, even if it's a very, aggressive or high pressure environment, the genes of that child and how they express themselves can outweigh or circumvent this environment. And I definitely see that as true, because I know people who have grown up in very troubled homes, and they're just really great people, and you'd be shocked. You're like, how did you come out this way? And
right.
There's many factors. I mean, who knows, right? But I think that is an interesting argument. But I don't know how we got to this, but we're
talking about Ice-T sit up there perpetrating like if he talks like Bryant Gumbel, he'll rap like Bryant Gumbel.
That whole thing, that whole talk like, equating one's speech to something that can shape their identity or their meaning, even, their value. When people identify with their speech pattern, that's another big problem. How I speak is who I am. That is a completely false way of thinking. You are not your speech pattern. You are so much deeper and richer as a person than the way you choose to speak. Speaking is a choice.
Yes.
Let's not get it twisted here. You're not an automaton. You're not a robot. We do have proclivities. We do have natures. Right.
And environment does shape you to some degree. Hence, growing up in the South.
Let me real quick. Marquise Stewart. No, but both of my parents are black. Go ahead, Brother Theo. Sorry about that.
No. I was just going to point to how folks from the East Coast have an accent, irregardless of education, and folks from the South have an accent regardless of their education. And I remember in the movie Ray, in one of the early scenes, Jamie, playing the character of Ray, talked about being country dumb or playing country dumb, where just because you were from the country and you spoke a certain way, people assumed that they could get over on you, and you could drive a snake out of the grass by playing country dumb and playing off of their preconceived notion about you. And that's something that plays not only just in the country, because there are people who believe that if they hear you use certain verbiage or if you have a certain delivery, that you can't possibly be smart enough to know or understand A, B, or C. I know, because I run across that problem quite often. Sometimes on my channel, it's the reason for Jowls Free. I understand that I speak like my father and them spoke, and there's a delivery I have that's dying, or that it's not as commonly heard today as it was, say, when I was growing up. And I understand that. I overstand that, and I do overstand that people who are not accustomed to hearing a certain delivery, when I'm relaxed, when I'm on your show, I'm not, I'm relaxed because I'm talking to you, and you and I have natural conversation that's organic. But I mean, when I really relax on my long shows, and I talk to folks like I talk at home.
Yes.
Some folks misconstrue that as, there's no way that you can sound like this and still know that. And it short circuits people sometimes, to where, I get a lot of reaction based upon that. And, I discern that, and I understand it. I'm not angry at anyone who has that misconception, but I do realize that part of that is because of this monolithic idea, or this monolithic misconception that Ice-T is perpetuating here on this show. That, hey, if you sound a particular way, then that must be indicative of where you're from and your educational level, and so you can't possibly talk about other things, because Ice-T said that if he could speak like Bryant Gumbel. Basically, he's saying I could think like Bryant Gumbel. That's what he's implying. That's what he's inferring by saying what he said. And that gives people the misconception or the wrong idea that, hey, okay, if I hear you speak a certain way, that tells me your level of intelligence.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that's the sad part, because the way you speak generally, or I'd say essentially, is just an example of how your parents spoke. That's really it. I mean, we change over time. Of course, we develop, but that's where we get our speech patterns from, as you stated in your experience. My parents, they're from the Midwest. My mother was an avid reader, so she had a very, I'd say, good way of, clear way of speaking. I guess she spoke what some would call proper English, so I picked that up very, very quickly from my mother. And my father pretty much, he spoke decent English, I guess, but like both of my parents were readers. So for me, that's just what I was used to. So that kind of shaped my delivery. And growing up where I grew up, that was not cool. Okay? So for me, I dealt with that a lot. This whole idea of why do you talk like that? And it's like, well, you use a term and they'll laugh like I can't believe you just said that word. And it's like, it's a word. It means something. It adds to the point I'm trying to make. You know what I'm saying? And that experience is tough, right? That experience is tough to deal with growing up, because what it does is it discourages basic things. And I'm not even talking about anything that is supposed to make you feel like you're better than other people, but just being interested in things. It lowers your capacity for interests. And I think that's one of the biggest problems about this culture, specifically the hip hop culture, is it diminishes one's ability to have interests in the world, interests in life. Your interests become funneled, and they're very limited in that they cannot go outside of these specific categories that these rappers talk about. If you start talking about things outside of these boundaries, if you start to have interests outside of these things, you now take on a completely different identity, and some would even argue race. And that's crazy to me. That, wow, we have to stick to this? Is this all we get here? Is this all I got? Is this all I can be? Really? So for growing up, it's just like, this can't be it. I'm sorry, guys. Like, this can't be it. And this is what a lot of this music culture indoctrinates. And you see this, and this is where it gets creepy, when you see the same behavior in the non-black communities.
Yes.
When you see Mexicans or Latinos, when you see Asians talking about, why are you acting white, using the N-word. I mean, actually, it was very common in the Bay. It wasn't even really frowned upon, actually, because it's different in the Bay. But in general, it's just like, wow, this is a type of mind control. Now, let me rephrase. Culture is a real thing, okay? Where your environment does have a strong influence on you. I have many friends that were non-black but took on the culture, right? And lived in the neighborhood, grew up in the culture, grew up in the neighborhood, right? There's this one artist, she's from Oakland. Her name is, goodness gracious. I swear, I can't remember her name, but she was getting in trouble years ago for using the N-word, and it don't look right, okay? Because she's just a blonde, she's not blonde hair, but she's a white chick, right? White girl, but I mean, you would never guess it if you heard her speak, but that's because she grew up in Fruitvale. She grew up like on the block. This young girl had been on the block slanging dope since she was probably 13. And this is what she knew. And so people made a big stink about it. But I knew her, and I knew her lifestyle. I know what she's been through. So I understand. She in a sense truly is that example of the product of your environment. Now, am I making excuses for her criminal lifestyle? Of course not. But I will say that I do understand your environment has a very strong influence on you, and even the way you behave and the way you speak. But what we're finding now is that same kind of influence is happening outside of the environment just through the music, which is kind of disturbing. And you'll really see that in the suburbs, right? You'll see kids in the suburbs who really don't have any connection to the community, but are behaving as if they do, right? That's just a little bit strange, but it's very, very common. So let's continue here.
But I get now the thing, Juan had a problem with me. I've talked to him before, and he said, Ice, in this song you say you did the bitch, or you did this to the girl with a flashlight. And I mean, it doesn't say he raped her, and for all you know, the girl might have liked it. I've been with women who've gotten things out of the kitchen and brought it into me and said, let's get bitty. And it's probably no different than the vibrator his wife uses, you know?
You know, I just think that's such a low kind
Let's get low,
attitude.
Juan.
I mean, basically, he's saying that the way he lives is to really abuse women, and that it's natural and normal, and that he wants to speak this out to young people. I just think that is absolutely repulsive. I mean, I can't relate to it. I can't relate to it from where I grew up in a poor neighborhood. I can't relate to it from where I live now. There's no way that you're going to tell me that's the way people should act, and that's the kind of thing that we should be influencing, spreading out there to kids to say, hey, that's the way that you should conceive of your manhood and yourself as a successful, positive figure, is to replicate what Ice-T's talking about.
Does that mean that everything that we hear, that everything that's transmitted in the media has to be positive?
No, not at all. But I think that you have to be held accountable for what you say. In other words, Ice is saying, oh, yeah, I sang a song about pushing a flashlight up a woman's private parts. Right. But, you know, it wasn't rape, and maybe she liked it. So what he's saying is, I don't have to be accountable. Maybe she liked it, so what's the big deal? I'm saying that's wrong. That's a big deal.
No.
Let's talk, Ice, let me ask you this. What about a sense of social responsibility?
Like I'm saying, if I had said rape the woman with a flashlight, it's different. You know, I don't say anything about raping the woman. I just said
semantics.
He did it, you know, and it's just a joke. I mean, if you listen to no, wait a minute, it is a joke. It's a joke because if you listen to the lyrics, it said the girl's titties start blinking like taillights. I mean, you can't take that serious. It's a joke, but it's just abstract. It's guys on the corner in a pool hall talking sex stories that are just jokes. Now, the thing of it is, who's going to take it seriously, and you're worrying about the effect it's going to have on somebody. And I can't police my audience. I mean, I can watch Terminator 100 times. I don't want to go shoot up a restaurant.
I hated that argument. I hated that argument. That was commonly said alongside, you know, well, I can't change what I'm rapping about. I can only talk about what I know. Those two things, I must have heard Ice-T and different ones say them things 100 times. Well, you know, if Arnold Schwarzenegger makes Terminator, nobody pickets him, and blah, blah, blah. It's apples and oranges and a straw man argument, but it was a common argument. And for a 21-year-old me, I guess I was probably around that time, it sounded like it made more sense than it should have. But, you know, I was young then. But yeah, it's total justification. And the devil loves when we justify devilishness.
Oh, does he? Oh. I mean, who is living in a Terminator film? Who's living in the future fighting robots? Who? No one. You can't, it's a false equivalency. You can't compare violent films set in the future that are completely fantasy to street life lyrics that are speaking to a specific group of people that are actually living that life in the real world at the same time. I mean, there's
that's right.
Oh, it's
in a modern day setting.
Yes. Yeah, this is where you're speaking about something real. Films aren't real, and in many cases, even though one will say, "Oh, well, a rap tape is a rap tape," you know, but it's speaking to a real person in the real world that is actually living out the lyrics that are inside of that rap tape, opposed to a film that is not real, but even further from reality, being that no one's actually living what that is. Now, That changes when you make a film like Menace to Society. But you don't see him talking about that. Well, this is before Menace to Society came out. This was 1990. But still, you get the point here. He's basically creating these false arguments just to kind of run away and hide and avoid actually facing what is being asked of him here. But
and to keep it going.
Exactly.
That's the bottom devilish line.
Yes.
Let's not kill my career. Let me keep the money flowing. Let me keep the devilishness going. I know who I'm serving at the end of the day. Ice-T was too intelligent and too connected. You know, he had already done movies by the time we're watching this. By this time, he had already done movies, so he was already aware of the Baphomet Hollywood system. He was already aware of what he was doing. He was justifying evil, making evil fair seeming. And it went from him doing it in a pseudo-intellectual manner in front of Oprah to these young kids doing it now. And I like what Word of the Day added. Yes, they used to also use the excuse or the justification ploy of, well, rap is just CNN for black folks. You know, which that was also right alongside, well, you know, I only rap about what I know, you know, which these things were repeated so much that I almost would bet, if I were a betting man, I would bet that in the documentation that gave instructions as to how to run this part of MK Ultra, they gave those three excuses. You know, say this is CNN for black folks. Say, you know, I'm only rapping about it because this is all I know. You know, these excuses, these were the justifications to keep this going.
Yes, absolutely. So let's continue here. There's 4 of these clips, and this is the first one. So we'll just get through this one.
Okay.
And we'll do part of the second one, and then we'll try to wrap up here. We don't want to keep the people too long.
All right.
We're going in overtime tonight, guys.
There it is. When I ask you about it, because you are obviously very talented. And so I wonder whether or not there are times when you think about the influence that you have on all of these young minds who...
Definitely. Definitely. There's points where I say, I don't want to make that record. You know, there's points. But I think that duty should be upon the artist to choose. And it's upon Juan to not agree with me. He has freedom of thought. He can say, I don't like it. But what we're saying is, do you want to let parents guide their kids, or do you want to let the police step in and say, you can't do this? See, parents should say, don't listen to that Ice-T record, and that's the end of it. Parents don't have any control over their kids anymore.
Okay, you say what?
I hear mine.
Yeah, what do you say about that? This is interesting. Kind of putting it on the weight or the shoulders of the parents, right?
Of the parents who have enough to deal with it as it is. And just to be frank, as I said, in the interest of full disclosure before we started off these Ice-T clips, this was the first record I hid from Mama Unplug 'Em, and Mama Unplug 'Em didn't play no games. She didn't even play the lottery. So it's not just a thing of, well, you know, let the parents, the onus is on the parents. Yes, that's true. But there's also the reality that after a certain age, kids are able to do things behind their parents' back. So why would you create a product that aided them in degrading their minds while they were doing things behind their parents' back? If they was going to sneak and listen to rap tapes, which I did, then, you know, why not make sure that what you're providing, if they sneak and listen to that, they're going to get something godly, something of God, because that was not the agenda he was being paid to promote.
Yes.
And that's the bottom line of it.
Yes.
You know, and yes, it's true. And it's interesting, Little Nas X used that same argument. Well, you know, parents, y'all should have let your kids listen to Old Town Road. Parents have a lot of things already that they have to watch out for. Things that are obviously threats to their children. and things that are covert threats to the children that they are aware of. Now, you as a grown person, you as an adult, you should have a sense of responsibility if you consider yourself an artist. That's also something that's flown out the window. People who had talent or who presented themselves to be artistic, again, there was this sense of responsibility. It died with the passing away of the knowledge rap era. You know, there was a great sense of responsibility going on at that time. Folks felt like, well, hey, you know, I have a platform, I have a message, let me teach these young brothers. To teach to each is what rap intended. You know, there was this whole trend of each one teach one, and that died. And it died and got laid to the side in lieu of the whole corporate and commercial agenda. You know, capitalism 101. What sells?
Yes.
And not only what sells, because I maintain they could have made knowledge rap sell. They could have designed movies that helped to popularize knowledge, but they did not, because the devil is the prince of this world. And all of the things of this world will corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And these things have more power over the children than what the parents say. Now, the devil always has a way of taking a degree of the truth to build his lie upon, because he cannot even create a lie from thin air. He has to build it on a truth. And there is a truth that, in spite of the desire to please the children, or the desire to not be seen as the Nazi mom, or the desire to just not have to worry about everything, in spite of that, yes, a responsibility still falls on the parent when the child is not at the age of accountability.
Yes,
there
we go.
And that's the devil's loophole.
Yes. It's really sick how they put it on the parents, and then later in the show, what some of the arguments is like, well, you have to talk to the kids. You have to see what the kids want. You have to talk to the kids and let the kids make the decision. And this was a big part of the 90s. This was a big thing in the 90s, this style of parenting, right? It's a type of parenting that allows the child to really kind of take the lead, right? And this was very popular in the 90s. And the problem with that is, as you said, the children are at an age when they can't really make decisions, especially moral decisions or decisions that require a type of accountability or responsibility or insight. You know, this is the whole idea of order and authority that the parents are supposed to provide, you know, setting parameters that has to be founded in a type of moral ethic. This is where the Christian worldview and the Christian faith comes in. This provides us a type of guidance, a type of base of parameters, a type of the Bible being guidance, getting guidelines, you know, for how to be, how to live. And it's just interesting how they go to that. And I think it's just an example of the times. But as you said, the parents have enough to deal with that it's much more difficult to have all of these extra obstacles. For instance, what he's and again, he's not being sincere here. We understand he's chasing a bag. He's playing a role. He is representing a company. He's representing a corporation. He's literally an extension of a corporation. So I just want to put that out there. But for those in the real world that sincerely make these arguments and have since, and we've heard them a million times, to respond to those sincere arguments, just using Ice-T as say a vector, what we see is, for instance, this idea that what they are producing is legitimate to begin with. To even say, let the parents deal with it, automatically agrees or accepts the product, accepts it as okay. That's where the red flag goes up. It's like, wait a minute, we're not even going to let you in the door with it because we don't accept it from the outset. So no, parents won't deal with it because it doesn't meet the proper requirements for what we think is acceptable. Shout out to Khalito Brigante in there was saying saying about the fallacies in this. I mean, we really could do a show just line by line breaking down each fallacy, each logical fallacy that they use in these arguments. It's hilarious if you really get technical with it. It's disturbing at the same time because you realize this is national television and this is the way a lot of people think about these things. And that part is just a bit depressing when you realize how easily these kind of arguments get over on the public. But also I'd add, okay, so it's not acceptable. Let's look at this as some type of drug or drug dealers. Like it's like a drug dealer coming into your neighborhood and taking over your block and, selling drugs and saying, oh, put it on the parents. Let them deal with it. Talk to your kids.
Wow.
Like let me come into your community and sell these drugs, make them available. But it's up to you to make sure your kids don't buy them. Who's going to agree to that? Who's going to think that's an acceptable way to see the situation?
Right. Right now, it doesn't look like many would, but just think of how the devil has moved in increments and gotten us to accept the things that we accept now in households that were not accepted 20 years ago.
Exactly. And I think this has a lot to do with the removal of shame.
Say that, brother.
With the endless pursuit for this type of liberty and freedom without bounds, one has to completely eliminate shame, right? And I think one big thing we're seeing right now through this Lil Nas X is that his whole argument is like, you know what? Not until we remove the shame of all of this will I be able to feel free. Now that the shame from my desires, my flesh, from my style of music and all of my sick and twisted ideas, by the removal of shame culturally, now I could do my art. And now I can teach all the youth that you can too. That's the message. I feel that that's his message, but it has a lot to do with the removal of shame. And there's something very important and significant and powerful about shame. There's a requirement. Yes. There's a need for shame.
Yes, Lord.
And it's interesting how
my brother, they talked about it.
What's that? Go ahead.
Biblical that as Egypt for not Egyptians who showed.
Oh, you fell out there. Hello?
Oh,
you broke up there for a second. All right, you want to repeat that?
Say that the Lord for not, and for, for not showing any shame and for acting like the Egyptians.
Yes.
Who showed no shame in the things that they did. And they've learned how to shift shame because it went from the person doing the odd or weird or queer behavior as being the one that's shame to now those who are shamed. You are made to feel shame.
So now those
apprehensive about speaking up.
Yes, those who now want to make proper moral arguments, just moral arguments, those that want to set boundaries and ethics, those who want to lay down and promote absolute morality. Now we are to feel shame, to point out the wrongs of some of these behavioral patterns and lifestyles. We are to feel shame now. It's been completely inverted. So it's not great point. It's and I'm wrong, and you've corrected me here. It's not that shame has been removed. It's that it's been shifted. Yes.
Thank you, Jesus.
Woo!
Shift shame instead of
deep. But yet so simple, right? Like just So, and I guess the most brilliant and ingenious things are the most simple in many cases. And that's one of them. Just shifting it, just inverting it. And now we're the bad guys. We are the ones out of touch. We are the ones with the closed minds for the ones with the open minds. And I remember when one time he said, yeah, don't be too open-minded. Your brain might fall out. I'll never forget when you said that.
Praise God.
Let's watch part 2 of this clip here before we wrap up here. So this guy, he gets up on here and he's like, listen, you know, I listen to what my children listen to. I let them listen to different types of music. And he's basically one of these parents that gets up and says, hey, look, I actually do that. I do speak with my children. I do listen to what they're listening to. I do play that type of role of censorship, right? I do play that role as a parent should, but I still wouldn't let them listen to your music. Basically,
wow.
What he says here. Let's play this here.
Attitude that comes out of it. My kids attend different type of concerts. They listen to type of music, but we watch what the kids listen to at home. And I agree with Oprah. You probably have a lot of talent. If you ever wanted to put it to good use, stop the genocide that's happening in your own communities, your own neighborhoods. Look at Alberta Williams.
But sir,
wait a minute, hang on a minute.
You're only listening to one verse out of my album, and you haven't heard my entire album. You can't take anything out of context.
I don't know if my
album is about the most positive album that's out on the rap market today.
I heard a portion of.
You don't even know what I do.
Okay, and based upon
how can you criticize me? You just heard one verse.
Based upon what you heard, would you then ban your children from listening to him?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I just can't buy it. I don't want him to be exposed to it. And I'll tell you.
What if, as he says, the rest of the album is really, really positive?
I still don't want him to expose to any part of it, okay? I can't buy it. If one portion of it's going to be that negative and that bad, okay, somewhere along the line, they may not even care about some of the other portions of it that are good. They're going to pick up on this. Maybe kids are kids. It's a forbidden type of fruit. They're going to say, hey, is this type of garbage?
I understand, Oprah, but your kids don't live in South Central Los Angeles. 387 of your kids didn't die last year. My audience isn't your kids. If they are, they want to know what's going on in my neighborhood.
Freedom of speech is freedom of speech.
I mean, how much of a contradiction was that right there? Like,
filled with it.
Like, oh well, my music's not for your kids. You know, what do you say? You know, we're dying basically. He's like, you know, your kids aren't dying and all this. It's like, but you are making music that, in a sense, kind of promotes and enables this. I don't know, man. The Ice-T is funny. This is just ridiculous, but Let's listen to this next lady, because there's Tipper Gore is on here, and I was young. I was 10 years old when this aired, so I wasn't, you know, I was on Ice-T's side at the time, so I would have been pro all of this. But I guess at this time, Tipper Gore was somewhat of a
villain to the whole thing.
Absolutely, similar to the one woman that went after Tupac.
C. Dolores Tucker, both of them.
Yeah. So
they were set up, folks who were against evil. It's part of the Hegelian dialectic too.
Now, so I don't want to
see Dolores not liking rap made us like rap.
You're breaking up a little bit there. Sorry, man. What was that? You want to repeat that one?
Dolores and Tipper Gore liking rap, and that's
oh yeah, you're cutting up there, man. I'm sorry about that. Something happened there. But yeah, so I don't want to make it seem like I'm promoting or supporting Tipper Gore, because I'm sure she is definitely part of that that dialectic. But what some of her arguments in this show, I agree with, especially now as a Christian man. I truly agree with the position she's taking on the show, and it's kind of messed up the way she's attacked when she's arguably one of the most reasonable and rational people on this panel. And it's just interesting to see this happening way back then, and this was quite a long time ago. This is what, 30 years ago this aired. And so to see what we're seeing today with this Lil Nas X guy, we're just giving you guys a comparison, a contrast here, taking you back a little ways, seeing how some of this concept of decency and obscenity. And I have a clip here that we're not going to be able to get into. We'll have to save this for next week. But I really want to get into this whole idea of what was once called obscene and how that has changed so much. And this is why we see exactly what we're seeing with basically professional strippers now as celebrities. With Lil Nas on poles, we see Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion and all of these types of ladies of the night that are now dancing for all of our young children, and our children are mimicking their dances and passing it around on TikTok, and it's all the rage, and parents are even following this stuff through the social media culture. So social media, in my view, just plays as a type of machine that just reconstitutes all of this culture, but diffuses it even more into further areas of society, into all types of areas where this madness and degeneracy, well, it doesn't belong anywhere. So the fact that it's spread anywhere is bad enough, but it's horrible. So let me see here. So we're gonna go with this next guy. This next guy, interesting. He looks really familiar. I'm sure you'll recognize this guy. I can't remember where I know him from. Apparently he's a writer or something, but again, the arguments here are just really, really interesting.
Yeah, I want to pick up on two things. One, Juan Williams said that the music industry is marketing this as the form of music to sell. That's just one aspect of between Tracy Chapman, Living Color. Within the world of rap music, there's Public Enemy who have some problems but are basically black nationalists. There's Stetsasonic who are humanists, who preach black education. There's Boogie Down Productions who in a similar vein. Let's not say all rap is one thing. It is not one thing. Rap is not a monolith, just like R&B or rock is not a monolith. It has to be taken artist by artist. Point two is that when you take an artist like Ice-T or any number of rap artists, what they really do, from my point of view, is describe the reality of the world they live in. When I was a kid, I read Native Son. It's one of the books that made me want to be a writer. That is a book that a lot of people would want to ban right now because of the depiction of violence in the world that Richard Wright depicted. To me, what Ice-T and some of the better rappers do is depict the world that contemporary urban youngsters live in. We can't be afraid of it. It's the reality of their lives. I think if there's anything, it's a postcard that tells us...
We can't be afraid of it. Is it necessary to promote it?
I think it's necessary to realize that it's a reality and to say that these records should not be played.
Nelson, where's the line between validating and exposing? I think the problem here is you have a lot of groups who are out there validating the racism, validating, celebrating the violence. And I think also we have a very distinguished panel. We're missing one element to the show. There are no producers or distributors on the panel today. And this is an economics issue as well. And so far it's been a no-comment approach on the part of Warner Brothers, Geffen Records, and others who are making the big money. They should be represented here.
Yeah, you will say what? I
own my own record label. I own a label that's distributed by Epic Records. And, I don't say you have to make a record any particular way. When an artist comes into me, they say, I want to make gospel music. I said, make the best gospel music you can. They say, I want to make this, make it.
So he's not just a dealer, he's also a distributor now. He owns his own label as well. So, again, he has skin in the game, He's definitely motivated here. But this just goes to show that sociopathic element we were talking about earlier. They're feeding on their own and the society at large, because it's not just our community that suffers from this type of culture, though it is probably the most touched, the most affected. As I said, it diffuses out into the rest of society. So, and I like how the other guy mentioned, hey, where's the execs on the panel? There's no execs here. He seems to, most of the show, he keeps making the corporate argument like it's corporations, it's the big guys, that are pushing all of this stuff, which is an important argument as well. But it just shows you the cycle of it. The corporations find the young talent, The young talent down and out wants to make money. The young talent starts making money doing bad things, and they end up finding a way to make their own ring, and they start hiring talent. And it just becomes this cycle, and everyone's trying to become or achieve a type of financial freedom mixed with elitism, mixed with some type of fame. And in the long run, unfortunately, an entire type of culture is created and generations are transformed. And that's my biggest issue with this long enduring experience with this industry and this culture, is that for the greed and desires and preoccupations of men, we've had to undergo a transformation, a cultural, a social, even economic, because I think these things have had economic effects on our people, because I think a lot of this culture has debilitated us mentally and socially in ways that probably would have been different, say, otherwise, if we didn't have this type of culture. Who knows what we would be doing as so-called as a people. So I think, for me, it's just it's frustrating to see these guys making these arguments. Of course, I do understand they have motives here, but for these guys and their motives, entire populations of people have been completely transformed, say, for the past 30 years. It's interesting when you look at the effects of this all, just for your artistic expression, so-called. You still there, bro, Theo?
Yes, sir. Yes,
okay.
sir.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's see. We should really wrap this up, man. We've been on here 2.5 hours now, or 3.5 hours. Goodness. Let's see.
This is the long playing version.
Yes. The
extended remix.
The extended remix. Let's go. Let's listen to the end of Ice-T here. Tipper Gore's gonna make her first point, which is good, and then we're gonna end it with this man in the tuxedo here, who makes once again. And I do understand this, but he makes once again an economic or a financial argument, the appeal to economy. And I think that's that's a big part of why we are in this hole, because we feel like if we could find a way to incrementally get some type of economic growth out of this industry, it'll help in some way, but hasn't seemed to work out, has it?
Let the artists do what they want to do. I own that, merchandising companies, a whole bunch of other things.
But let's address the issue of economics.
Money is what you're gonna sell. To me, I'm in it because I am an artist. I try to treat my artists like artists. To be honest, record companies are after money, but they could have never conceived making a record like NWA. They wouldn't have said, let's make a record that says that to make the money. That's what the artists wanted to do. The record company's job is to put the record out there. That's all they want to do.
Tipper?
Well, I would hope that both artists and record companies would put a higher value on our kids. We all share a responsibility for the values that we transmit to our kids. We have freedom of speech in this country, and you have a right to have lyrics that abuse women, that use racism, but we have a right to speak out against them, and we also have a right to alert parents that this is being marketed aggressively to very young kids at a time when they are forming their opinions.
Yeah, you say that. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well said.
That was beautiful. Regardless of how you feel about this woman and who she is as a person, let's address the ideas. The person is not what matters, it's the ideas. Address the ideas. That is just exactly how we need to be addressing culture in general, especially entertainment culture, through that lens. And I think that lens, and I believe she's a Christian, but that lens inherently has a Christian faith as foundation. I think only through, well, of course, someone could say, oh, well, I'm moral and I'm not a Christian. I get that argument. But you can't claim those morals with any actual, I'd say, logically, you can't claim that, because you do not have a moral giver. You do not have a moral authority. You're claiming morals, but where did you get those morals? As a Christian, with the Christian faith, we can answer that question. Just to qualify the statement. So,
and we also should point out that This is a bit like watching a play. When you're watching a play, you should root for the good guy. That's what normal people do. But you also should realize that you're watching a play, and that it's scripted. And, I know Tipper Gore to be part of the elite, quote unquote, part of the Illuminati, as well as Ice-T being a lower level member of the Illuminati.
Yes.
And so they are there to play off of one another.
I mean, we're watching Oprah. Okay. So.
Right. Right. So it's a staged event.
Yes.
And, just like when you're watching a movie or a play, you shouldn't get too carried away when the good guy beats the bad guy up.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, it's all make believe. And, when they go backstage, they're going to break bread together and maybe even have a glass of wine.
Yes. Yes. But is this to say that the play's script does not have some relevance,
some truth in
it,
absolutely,
or at least some ideas that we could kind of chew on?
Yes, sir.
There's some relevance to some of these things that we can apply to our experience, and that's why we're using these clips here. We're watching Oprah Winfrey, guys. Okay.
Right. Right.
We're watching Oprah, man. So.
Right. Just for folks who don't have that abstract thinking quite down pat, to where everything is so literal, they don't take things in context, or things that are figurative, they take literally, and all of that. Just to lay it out for that small minority of people that are listening, because I know that the vast majority of your listeners are sugar sharp.
Indeed. But yeah, what I like about this clip, and the reason I think it's so relevant, is because a lot of these arguments are still made today. We still hear these conversations, and a lot of people think these ways, or around these ideas. So it's just very, very relevant. And this is 30 years ago, and we're still dealing with the
results. Right.
Dealing with the results. Yes.
Hey, brother, is it just me, or does that brother look a little overexcited and overdressed? He's like, I'm going to go see Winfrey. He about to start singing, and we began to rock steady. All right, man. Okay.
Man, I'm over here.
We have too much fun tonight.
Oh man! So let's end it off with
Glory
this.
To God.
Let's end it off with this guy's point. And again, just listen to it. It's interesting. We always find a way to enable, when we have individual interests and motives in mind.
I would like to speak on behalf of rap music and music in general. I'm a concert promoter, and what I would like to mention is the fact that we've had at least 4 concerts in the last 30 days in the city of Chicago. Each one of those concerts had at least 10 to 12,000 kids there, and no one has turned on the 6 o'clock news or heard about any violence. Okay, I've had the opportunity to work with Ice-T himself. Secondly, there's an economic issue here, because we're talking about there are now black cameramen, there are black technicians, there are black video. There's a black record company. There's a young gentleman in Miami by the name of Luke Skywalker that he knows, who has a record label now, who will now allow me to produce the concerts, where before we were only performers. Now we're the producers of these affairs.
Juan, you want to say what?
Okay, so we'll that'll be our last clip as far as this is concerned. But what do you got to say about that? Interesting, huh?
Very, very, very interesting, because all it shows is that the devil will allow for you to gain more stake in his devilishness if it will keep the devilment going. That's all. Mm-hmm. Nothing to be proud of. Sometimes we get the mistake of being proud. We see black actors and actresses or certain entertainers making certain leaps and bounds, it appears. You know, I think about Halle Berry standing up there crying after she allowed for herself to fornicate on the screen to get an award.
Yes.
Yes, they will give you certain titles and accolades and whatnot only if you push the devil's agenda. And so at the end of the day, it's all lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, pride of life. We all have sinned and fallen short, most certainly. But, it's good to put it where it goes. Maybe for that man and for his family, it was a benefit that he was able to go from the level he was at to move into promotion and whatnot. But what about the other families that were hurt and broken because of his promotion of devilish entertainment? Nobody speaks of those victims.
Yes.
And it's just a sad thing, but the devil is the prince of this world and the god of this age. And I think that at every turn we prove that tonight.
Amen. Couldn't have said it better myself. So yeah, we want to thank you all for being with us tonight. We appreciate you guys for joining. This was an extended effort on both of our parts here, so we appreciate you guys hanging out. Now the Unplugging family in the chat, you guys are well familiar with the extended
my late
version.
Night antics.
Yes,
right.
this wouldn't even be considered an extended version. Oh man, but around these parts, this is extremely extended for me at least. And I loved it. I had a great time, and honestly, I probably could go another hour just with all the stuff that we have left to discuss, probably even longer than that. But we want people to view this work here, and I understand anything over 30 minutes most people complain about, so I don't know how 3.5 hours is going to get over.
We'll see, right?
Yeah. Watch it in bits, watch it in clips. I don't really know what to say, but really this is just as if we were on the phone having a chat, or if we were having a meal having a chat. Whenever we do, it's for hours, so it's kind of like you guys are just joining with us, and we're having a little group listen, here. So
indeed,
that's just really how we do. So. We appreciate you all the mods. Hector Luma, good to see you. Rob Tick, Kobe Brewster, MJA, and all of the rest. Really appreciate you guys. All my Patreons in the house, peace to you. Thank you for being with us and continuing to support the work, as well as my PayPal supporters, all of those that contribute in ways outside of sharing and spreading the information. Really, really appreciate you guys. You make this thing a reality. And yeah, we're just going to keep delivering here. We're going to be continuing with episode 13 of Tricknology, where we will be continuing on this discussion. We have a bunch of other clips that we're going to talk about and really flesh out this long trajectory of hip-hop music and the music industry and its effect through its technology on society, on culture, as well as the racial impact that this has had and the societal impact it has had. Really looking forward to it. Again, I thank you all for being with us. So any last things you want to say before we say our goodbyes here, Brother Theo? And as well, of course, would you please end us off with a beautiful prayer?
Most certainly. And I just want to thank you for opening up your forum to have such edifying conversation. And I thank everybody for their participation. I thank you all for your patience. Please strike that like tonight. We got 530 people watching, 444 hit the like. A lot of eye and ear hustlers out there, and that's okay. We appreciate you anyway. And also, if you would like to check out my expose on Lil Nasty X, please do. Just turn on your notifications, and it'll either be up late tonight or first thing in the morning. You'll find that it's just about done. I just need to do the vocals. My vocal cords might be done for the night, but we'll see. I like to fuss and fight until broad daylight. So I just might do it again and get on there and finish my vocals tonight. But I also may just rest them. But whatever the Lord says, you'll see it by tomorrow morning. I thank everybody in advance, and God bless you all. No dealing with healing tonight with Dr. Mo, that'll be for next Monday night's show following this show as well. So again, thank you all for joining in, and let us just touch and agree as we ask in the authority, the name of the Lord and Savior, Jesus, the Christ of Nazareth, the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Father, we ask you to please forgive us for our sins, Lord, and please open up your ear and hear our prayer petition in Jesus' name. Lord, we ask in Jesus' name to please loose and then bind to us right now, Lord. Psalm 23, Psalm 91, and Ephesians 6, and all of the promises and protections therein. Please lead us beside the still waters. Maketh us to lie down in green pastures. Restore our souls. Let us know that you are indeed our shepherd, and we shall not want for anything. Lord, please also loose the angels that you have assigned to watch over us, Lord, to bear us up lest we dash our foot against a stone. And Lord, please loose and then bind to us now, Lord, the whole full armor of God, from the crown of our head to the soles of our feet. Bind to us, Lord, that the whole full armor will never deplete. And Lord, please bind to it the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ. And Lord, bind that same type of whole full armor, Lord, to the angels that you have assigned to watch over us. Loose those angels right now, Lord God of glory, to surround us and link arms around us and to do battle on our behalf in Jesus' name, Heavenly Father, Lord. And protect our dwellings made of flesh and bone, as well as our dwellings made of brick and stone. And to be with us, Heavenly Father, Lord God of glory, and protect everything that you've allowed for us to be stewards over and to own, including our pets in Jesus' name. And let those angels be with us everywhere we roam, inside or outside the home, to protect us from things seen and unseen, and all things unclean, known and unknown. And Lord, please bind to us a greater hedge of protection than you gave to your servant Job in Job chapter 1, verse 10, except we ask that you don't let anything that the devil tries to do to come against us be able to penetrate and get in. And Lord, we ask that you'll seal that protective hedge with a protective ceiling, foundation, floors, walls, and roof, and seal it all with the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ and make it airtight. And we ask that you'll do all of these things according to your will for our lives, which is that we live and not die, that we prosper, even that our souls may prosper, and that you give us the hope and the future and the good expected end that you have planned for us. In Jesus' name, we touch and agree, and we call it done. In the name of the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ the Son, amen and amen.
Amen. Whew. Oh,
thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Jesus. What a great ending there. Really appreciate that. And we appreciate you all for being with us. Wow, 500 people still listening right now out there. Wow.
Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, all of you out there listening. This is just, it's just a blessing. I really appreciate you all. This truly is a blessing to have this community and to have just godly thinking, righteous, faithful people out there in the world that find this work worthy of their time and energy and attention. I really appreciate you guys. We'll be back soon. Very, very soon. More content to come. I said 2021 is going to be different. We're going to be hitting you guys from all sorts of angles because it's time to do the work, and we are working hard. Trust me. Overtime is an understatement.
Yes, Lord.
Overtime is definitely an understatement. So thank you for all of your support. Much more to come. I want to end the show as always by first thanking you all, but also thanking the Most High God. In Jesus' name, amen and shalom.